space door stops. All eyes will turn to Arrakis.
I can't sit here and worry about every little user request that comes in.
User requests are what computers are for.
Doing our business is what computers are for.
He is a serious threat to our computer security system.
Well, I'm not a fool.
What's even going on here? I can't tell. Is this some sort of throne room scene? It's so frustrating. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly live stream for the Restitutor Orbis channel, and I'm your host, Lucius Aurelian. Thank you for joining me. I'd like to extend a greeting to all Prime Explorers, and all others joining us. I thought that we would go back and take a look at the ultimate reality glitch, which in this particular exploration, we've templated to have begun in the 1980s. Now, that's a theory. We're going to be spending this exploration looking in terms of how that lines up. Now, for those of you who've been with the channel for a while, say about a year or longer, you may recall that last year we did a couple in detail live stream explorations of the 1980s. We were looking at the quote unquote power culture of the 80s, and we were looking at why the 1980s has an enduring presence, even in the 2000s or this century, whatever you want to call it. And so I want to start with one of the prime examples, and that would be Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Yes, Grand Theft Auto Vice City, a video game that was released in the early 2000s, 2002 if memory serves. And that was back in the day when gaming was still on your own system and you had a disc that you kept. And so you had a physical copy of the game. Of course, now everything is streamed, much like movies. We'll get to that in a second. But Grand Theft Auto Vice City, what it did was, for people who lived through the 80s, this was a bit of a callback, but then it also, how shall we say, inculcated an entirely new generation into the 1980s. Now, it was just a video game, but it had everything. It had controversy. It had all the references to the 1980s. To be fair, the plot of the video game was really a mishmash of Miami Vice and Scarface, reversing a couple roles. In fact, they even had, what was his name? Philip Michael Thomas, the actor who portrayed Tubbs. I think I got that name proper. I'm shooting from the hip on that one. But he voiced Lance Vance. And then, of course, you had Ray Liotta voicing Tommy Vercetti. Long story short, this game actually established a culture and really a measuring stick for all Grand Theft Auto games to follow since then. I mean, really, it is considered one of the greatest video games of all time. Not, of course, counting the original Fallout games, but it's interesting because what it did was it really kept the 80s in everyone's mind in many different ways. Now, you might think, well, gaming was limited at that time. It really wasn't. I mean, it was hard to meet somebody then who hadn't played the game. And keep in mind, I'm speaking as an older individual, even in the early 2000s. So just something to keep in mind. It's the enduring presence of the 80s and the 2000s. So why does that pop culture endure? Not really sure. And, the Indiana Jones trilogy, the original Indiana Jones trilogy, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, those were all 80s movies. They talked about making a sequel in the 1990s, but they never did. It wasn't until the 2000s that we finally got the sequel. And it was really strange because it was a sequel no one really seemed to want to be involved in. Steven Spielberg didn't really seem to want to do it in his interviews. I mean, he just kind of, yeah, I'll do it. Harrison Ford didn't seem to be really keen on doing it, but yeah, I'll do it. And, we got a movie. And, for whatever reason, it just didn't feel like the other Indiana Jones movies. I'm not going to say it's a bad movie. There are parts of it that I enjoyed. But again, it's this odd callback that we have to this continued culture. And we even got another one here just a couple of years ago. Or was it just a year ago? Dial of Destiny. Maybe I'm blocking it in my mind. I never saw it. I did see Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I never saw Dial of Destiny. Couldn't quite figure out what was the point behind that one. But maybe somebody enjoyed it and that's totally fine. My film going efforts and habits don't have to be yours. That's completely okay. But it's a great example, though, of how this culture, this mentality of the 1980s lives to this day. Why is this? Yes, the Superman Returns from the mid-2000s. This is a very perplexing example because in this particular movie, they couldn't figure out if they wanted it to be a remake, a reimagining, or an actual sequel. Now, many of us grew up with the original Christopher Reeve Superman films, and yes, even Superman 3, for all of its wacky hijinks comedy, still has its good points in it. And Christopher Reeve was always wonderful in those films. I mean, a lot of people say he was Superman. But nothing against Brandon Routh. I mean, he looked like Superman, and he gave a good performance. But I always thought when I saw this movie, and I didn't really want to rewatch it. And keep in mind that I was a diehard fan of the Superman films and even the original comics. I always thought, they probably just should have ended the film after he saved the plane, because it seemed to go downhill real quick from there. And I mean, they had great performers in it at the time, but it was just something about it felt really off, as though, they really couldn't decide if it was supposed to be a remake, a reimagining, or a sequel. And it kind of failed at all three. Now, why are we referring to movies again? Because we have this example of why we can't really let go of the 1980s. And a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, the first Superman movie was made in the late 70s. True. But the Superman culture, the phenomenon with Christopher Reeve, was really felt in the 1980s. Most of the films, 3 of the 4, were made in the 80s. It's kind of the same thing with Star Wars. The original Star Wars came out in 77, but it was really more of an 80s phenomenon. I know, maybe you can say I'm generalizing, and that's totally okay. It's just how I'm seeing it. If you want to disagree with me, feel free to. No worries. Now, something else we discussed last year, the rise of the synths, or synthwaves it's called. You can go around on YouTube and you can find no shortage of the wonderful synthwave videos where you'll have this very intriguing synthesized music that's played with some very beautiful landscapes, or even some of the landscapes that you saw in the intro to this particular exploration. And there was a video about this made in 2019. There's several music artists that have made their careers doing synthwave. I believe Nina's one of them from Germany, but there's many, too many to list. But John Carpenter, who you may recall was the director that we explored Old World in film, and a lot of his films threw out a lot of interesting enigmas in them, or rather odd references. For example, in They Live, they very clearly refer to the year 2025, a film that was released in 1987. Very interesting. Maybe it's just a coincidence, I don't know. But it's rather intriguing that John Carpenter actually narrated this particular film. And John Carpenter was known for scoring his own films. He was considered to be quite talented. And I'll admit, I always enjoyed his music. I thought his theme for Escape from New York was just incredible. But again, here we are in the 2010s, and we now have films, and we have an entire music subculture, subgenre. Really, you could say it's an entire pop culture, if you will, its own segment of it, of synthwave. I mean, let's be honest, how many of us just throw on the synth wave and listen to it for hours on end? I mean, you can check those videos out. They got a lot of views because people sit on them and they just listen to them. And I understand the purpose and the mentality behind it. But then last year when we did this exploration, I also asked you to go back and actually listen to genuine songs from the 1980s. And I think the example I highlighted was Love in Siberia by Laban, a very classic 80s pop song, not a very well-known 80s pop song. I mean, well enough known, but, not one of the mega hits. And compare it with some of that synthwave and see if you could really determine the difference. I mean, the really odd thing about synthwave is once you start listening to it over, I don't know, about 5 to 10 minutes, it all kind of starts to sound the same. I mean, it's comfortable, it's reassuring, but it's really, really strange. It's not really something I could put into words, but, maybe that's just my own perception on it. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, there you go. A question at a time. Yeah, you're right, Griff. Good to see you, Griff. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, 80s pop. I mean, there's something with the music, and there was something very creative at the time. Dallas. Yeah, Jan Hammer, the Miami Vice composer. Listen to some of his music, like Crockett's theme and so on and so forth. I mean, that's legitimate creative music at the time. Now, I'm not trying to denigrate or demean anybody who does synthwave. They're wonderful artists. But it is intriguing that that entire genre is based on an earlier genre, and it's even called it synthwave. It's kind of strange and bizarre. So, Hollis, don't worry. We'll be getting to 1984. There's a whole section on it. So just hang with me, all right? I'm getting to it. I'm building up to it. But yeah, good question. So moving on past the music, everybody's more familiar with Cobra Kai or the Karate Kid films. So we had the Karate Kid films, again, the 3 of them from the 1980s. Yes, the third one came out in the late 80s. And then we got the TV show Cobra Kai that came out in the 2010s again. Now, I'll be honest, I was a big fan of this show. I really appreciated the first 2 seasons. Something happened in the third season. I'm not exactly sure what. I mean, I still enjoyed it, but it seemed like as the show went on, it was more something about it didn't feel as genuine and authentic. I really appreciated when the main character was more Johnny Lawrence in the first two seasons. We were seeing a little bit of a role reversal. It felt real, but it still had a little bit of the comedy in it. Maybe that's why it felt more real. Whereas time went on, I don't know, it got a little bit of a sitcom feel to it. I'm not even going to talk about the sixth season. You know, it's not a review on it. This is really a reference to the fact, though, that this show is so popular and the mentality, the intellectual property mentality that we have in entertainment that lives on came from the Karate Kid in the 1980s. No one was thinking of doing a Karate Kid sequel, though, in the 1990s, which is quite fascinating, isn't it? Well, you know, the franchise had kind of run out. Yeah, we had some sidequels, and I certainly don't want to undercut Hilary Swank in the next Karate Kid, and yeah, that came out in the 90s, but they didn't really continue these characters that they had the way they did with the TV show. So very, very interesting that it's yet another reference, and it's immensely popular. So popular that Netflix got it from YouTube Red in the third season. No, I'm not saying Netflix is responsible for the show's gradual decline, but you know, the longer you have a show on, I understand it becomes difficult to be creative, especially when your show's a bit of a reference. But this was unique because it had original characters and original situations. So now you might recall that Kroll is my favorite film. Again, an early 80s film. And there's oddly enough a difference as you go through the 80s that we'll talk about as well. You have everything before 1984, and then you have everything after 1984. And you're saying, well, what's that based on? That's going to be the conclusion we get to for this exploration. But this is my favorite film. It's a fantasy, sci-fi. It's completely unique. No movie like it's ever been made, and no movie like it'll ever be made again. Apparently, J.J. Abrams was talking about doing a remake, but there's been no news on that. So I'm just going to settle down, and yeah, I don't think there's going to be any Kroll remake. So, you know, at least that's one thing from the 1980s that can live on in my mind. How shall we say, unblemished by a remake or reimagining? I don't know. Maybe J.J. Abrams is going to remake Megaforce. Yes, not every single movie from the 1980s was true gold. And if you've never seen this one, it's quite intriguing because this was considered a right-wing film from the early 1980s made by a Hollywood director who was into stunt work. And yes, that's Barry Bostwick there sporting his spandex. And little note here, the costume designer on this film was Mattel. Yes, the toy company Mattel. And it features an international force of elite military commandos from all over the world. Oh, and the Confederate States of America. Actor Michael Beck, his character's name is Dallas, and he's wearing a Confederate flag. I can't explain it. I guess in this movie's history, the Confederacy really did come back. It's really strange. But to Michael Beck's credit, he never talks badly about this movie because it helped him buy a house. You know, and if you don't know who Michael Beck is, he was Swan in the 1970s film The Warriors. So I don't know, maybe there's a story behind it. But anyway, strange film from the 1980s. A lot of good work, though, on the modeling. But, you know, why aren't we seeing Megaforce get remade? I don't know. Now, to really talk about what changed in the 1980s that resonates today. The arrival of the VCR. Now, yes, they had VCRs in the 70s, true, but what they didn't really have in the 70s was the video store. Ah, yes, the wonderful video store that changed everything. Now, for those of you who've been around a while and remember this, you know, you remember what a revolutionary move this was, having the VCR in your home. Because now you weren't stuck to seeing the movie in the theaters. When I wanted to see Superman 1 and 2, we went to the video store and we rented it. I worked at the video store and we got a discount on it. Anyways, and yeah, this was your old VCR and you'd pop the tape in there. And you know, there was something to be said for the video stores. No, that's not me in the background there. But anyway, you get the idea, though, of what a change this was to how movies were received. And let's be honest, movies were pushed as pop culture. They've been pushed as pop culture all the way through the 20th century, the 1900s, and they continue to this day. But the method of it changed immensely. And this was that first big change. Now you could rent the movie and you could take it home and you could watch it with your family. What a change it was. Robert Black Market VCR. Oh, yes. Yeah, those were quite the thing in the day, too, weren't they? Oh, Video 99. Yeah, you know, and the funny thing was there were a bunch of the local video stores. You know, you didn't have the big chains yet, like Blockbuster and Videos to Go and Movies. Oh, Space Hunter. Yeah. Interesting film from the early 1980s. In space, no one can hear Molly Ringwald scream. Okay, I'll stop. But what's intriguing, though, is how it just changed everything. And, a lot of the video stores, and these were your home-owned video stores, they were local businesses, what they would go through to make the appeal of movies and, how much a new release cost, how much a budget tape cost. You had different costs at the time. And it didn't really change until the advent of the DVD. And, really all that happened with the DVD was you just replaced the old VCR cassettes with DVDs. It wasn't until streaming came along that the video store, the video rental store, died a very quick and unfortunate death. Now, there's still some out there, apparently, but, if you ever watch that South Park episode, there is something oddly unsettling about it. Oh, look at that. I think I see a poster up there for Conan the Destroyer. Yeah, I couldn't rent any of those to save my life. But the funny thing about it was everybody was now able to watch movies at home, and everybody could see their favorite movie time and time again. For example, I remember renting the original Karate Kid, and we'd always go back and we'd watch the scene that's gotten replayed so many times in Cobra Kai, the final crane kick to Johnny Lawrence's face. Yeah, certain I'm not the only one that did that, but it's an example though of what changed, because prior to the video store, you saw it in theaters and that was it. And then you waited until it aired on the Sunday night movie, whether it was the ABC or the NBC Sunday night movie, it didn't matter. And then you'd watch it. But with the video store, that changed everything. And so is that one of the explanations for why we have this resonation, or why the 80s endures? Because it was the first decade where the VCR, the VHS was prominent. And yes, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Betamax competition. Although about the only place I remember the competition was on Married with Children. So, hey, Sooner West, good to see you. And thank you very much for that. And welcome to the new members. And please enjoy the member content. So, oh yeah, Donut, love The Dark Crystal. Classic film there. I tried to get into the new series. It was okay, but there's something about the original film that just completely blows me away. Hey, Doc, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. So that's really the interesting portion. Oh yeah, you saw it, Girls Gone Wild. I mean, by the 1990s, there were all kinds of things on VHS that you could find. So, but maybe that's the explanation of the enduring presence of the 1980s and the 2000s. It was the era of the VHS. All these movies were captured. You can now watch them on tape, and most of them made it to streaming today, depending on what you want to watch. But let's take a look at something else from the 1980s that we've only talked about in jest and we haven't really gone into detail on. And that's the start of personal computers, the internet, because believe it or not, the internet really became practical in the 1980s. Yes, it existed from the late 60s as ARPANET, but the 1980s was when the internet really came along. And then a reference to CERN. Hey, wait a minute. What's this got to do with CERN? Well, just stay with me here. So let's go to our next series of images and we'll take a look at this. And this is where things start to get a little even more intriguing. Now, just so you all know, I'm not intentionally trying to make connections here or point out these coincidences. They just have a means of jumping out at you. Ah, yes, look at this. This really brings back some memories for me. Back in the day, and personal computers were where everything started. The 10 megabyte computer system, only $5,995. This is the late 70s. I mean, thinking ahead for the 80s is what they said. By the way, how much would that be now? Let's just say it's 1980. Anybody want to do the quick math on how far $6,000 from 1980 goes now? Yeah, inflation's been quite the beast, especially at the start of this decade. Let's just say it was mighty pricey. What's that, RB? What a deal. Yeah, exactly. 10 megabytes, We won't even talk about the storage capacity on our cell phones, or our smartphones as we call them now. But yeah, it's pretty intriguing. You're not too far off there, Mark. It's a little bit more than that, but maybe somebody wants to look it up real quick. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right. $67,000. So, hey, I want to buy my 10 megabyte computer. Let's get rolling. So, the super creaky saloon doors to the adult section. Oh, yeah. Let's not forget that. Oh yeah, Sooner West, the Amiga 500, and the original gaming systems too. Took 3 men to carry it, says Basil. Yeah, isn't that the truth? RB, did it have AI capabilities? No, but actually we're going to get to that in a second. So what really changed in the 1980s was personal computer. And who better to sell the personal computer to the standard consumer than Captain Kirk himself, William Shatner? Ah, yes. William Shatner was quite prominent in many of those personal computer commercials, the Commodore especially, in the early 1980s. And you see there he's got the Star Trek II Wrath of Khan hairdo going there. So I'm not going to say anything about William Shatner's hair, but he was the one who was there to sell the computer. And next thing you knew, suddenly the personal computer was showing up everywhere. Everybody had their little Apple II, their Macintosh, or their Commodore. You suddenly saw one in every house, every farmhouse. And yet, just 5 years earlier, the most anybody had was a very, very overpriced Texas Instruments calculator. Okay, I'm being facetious there. It wasn't Texas Instruments, but it's a fun reference, so you might get it. But very interesting that all this effort for the Commodore by William Shatner himself. And you can go back and you can find these numerous commercials that he did, so this is long before Priceline. Yeah, they had William Shatner selling us computers. Now, was that by design or is that just a coincidence? What do we think? Why William Shatner? What did I miss here? He's still making sales. Yeah, that's true, Basil. He definitely is. Guy's in his 90s and he's not stopping. Probably won't ever stop. So, very intriguing. Here we go, Brian. Intellivision and ColecoVision, yeah, they really haven't. And just wait until you find out how extreme this really is. I mean, we're talking technology from the late 70s, early 80s. It actually goes a lot further than that, contrary to what we may think. Now, the internet. There was a time when people thought the internet wasn't going to amount to anything. That I recall many conversations in the 90s, especially with knowledge management and data transfer. There was talk that the internet was going to be folded, just completely let go by the late 90s, early 2000s. The reason being is because at that time, with just the old modem line, yes, remember the modem line? You plug in your phone cord to your computer and you dial up. And, if anybody had, what was it called? Napster at the time, it would take you a whole evening just to download one 4 to 5 minute song. Now, I'm not going to say anything more about Napster. It's just an example of how data transfer speeds were very slow. And so a lot of people thought that was going to be the end of the internet. And keep in mind, the only thing the internet was in the 90s was primarily what you see right in front of you. It was text. There were no pictures, and there were sure as heck no videos. Yeah, you could find them, but they took forever and a day just to download, and that's not an exaggeration. But then the theory was, well, fiber optic cables are going to save the internet. What does this have to do with the 80s? The internet was made possible in the 1980s with the World Wide Web and with the first TCP, which was set up in Maryland University. We'll look at the individual here in a second who did that. But let's go back to the very beginning of computers. What's really the inception of computers? How did they start? Well, we're looking at one of the originals in Germany, although it should be noted that this is a mechanical computer, the old Zeus from Conrad Zuse. I'm trying to remember the designation behind it, but anyway, you can still go see this at the German Museum of Technology in Berlin. Yeah, quite a large apparatus, isn't it? But just think about this, the ability to do numerical calculations. Now, this was in the 1930s, but what was really the start of computers? And oddly enough, we have to look at this particular individual and make sure I didn't miss anything here. And this is John Vincent Atanasov. And Atanasov is actually a Bulgarian name. He was originally born to a Bulgarian family and had a V instead of an F at the end of his name, but they changed the spelling, kind of like Doc Emmett Brown from Von Braun in Back to the Future. Anyways, kind of a jack of all trades, and he was active in numerous universities. And at the time in the 1930s, prior to World War II, he was trying to figure out a more efficient way to do numerical calculations. And with a graduate student of his, oh, yes, here's a little monument to him that's actually in Bulgaria for his achievements. With a graduate student of his, a guy by the name of Berry, that was his last name, they developed the Atanasov-Berry computer. Now, what's significant about this first computer? This was the first automatic electronic digital computer. Now, it's considered a unique contribution. It was developed in 1943. 1943. At least that's when it was released, although there's conflicting accounts that say it came out in 1942. So 1942, 1943, when did he actually get the idea? John Vincent Adamazov came up with this on his own to solve systems of linear equations and tested it in 1942 and then released it in 1943. But the intriguing part about it was, unlike Konrad Zus's Z1 computer that the Germans had, this one was actually considered the first automatic electronic digital computer. And it also is considered the first electronic arithmetic logic unit, or ALU. Now, arithmetic logic units are integrated into every modern processor. Every computer that we're all looking at right now has an ALU on it. The first ALU was the Adamazov Berry computer that you're looking at. Now, does anybody know where this incredible achievement was done? And here's again where the coincidences start. There's a lot of people aren't aware of where this happened. And again, I'll get to how this ties back into the 1980s, because you had to develop RB, I believe this story. Oh, goodness. Vaughan, Austria. I'll give you all a hint. Adamazov may be from Bulgaria, but what state do I like to talk about? Oh, the garage? Yeah, no, it's even better than that, Sooner West, where he actually got the idea. We'll get to that in a second. But what university was he working at? And where did he develop this? And I'll give you a hint. This university has a place called Adamazov Hall, and they venerate the guy there to this day. Oh, look at that. Kathy's all over it. Yes, Iowa. Which university in Iowa? Because there's 4 major ones. You're correct, Kathy. It is Iowa. But which of the Iowa universities is it? Yes, RB. It is in Iowa. I know. Remember, I'm not intentionally pointing out these coincidences. I'm just letting them come naturally, all right? All right, I'll just let you all know. It was developed at what is today Iowa State University. It was called Iowa State College when he developed it in the 1940s. So, no, not the Hawkeyes, the Cyclones. Yeah, you got it. Iowa State. So that is where the first computer. Now, what's really interesting, though, is that in the history of the development of computers, the ABC computer, as it's called, is not considered significant. At least that's what they say. Well, you know, Konrad Zus's computer was more prominent, and then, of course, subsequently Colossus that they developed over in the United Kingdom. After using the vacuum tube technology from this one in 1943, that was more significant. Apparently, this ABC computer wouldn't pass a Turing test, and you couldn't program it. That was its limitations. And yet it has the basic technology, the basic hardware that's still on every single computer we use to this day. And back to the whole story. Oh, this is a good one. Iowa must be the most mysterious state. Yeah, it's another example, Albie, where we have all these things that are just overlapping there. You know, I can't quite explain it myself. And it's not that I try to do this. It just, it just happens. What can I say? So anyway, yeah. The baseline of hardware for all computers that's used to this day, developed in Iowa by a guy who was originally from a Bulgarian family. He was a professor at Iowa State, and it was one of his graduate students that helped him develop this little doozy. And yeah, what can you really say about that? And oddly enough, that would lead to the development of the personal computer. You know, of course, Colossus and everything as part of the efforts over in the UK. And they built a replica of this in Iowa State in the 1990s. John Vincent Adamazov passed away in the mid-1990s. I did not get to meet him, unfortunately, but people venerated the guy quite extensively. And Adamazov Hall is named after him. And, you know, if you want the computer science program, go hit up Iowa State University. I don't know what it's like to this day, but, you know, it's still referenced it. Now, oddly enough, at the same time in the 1980s, CERN, which, you know, we're not going to talk about what CERN actually stands for, but the actual original search for nuclear studies, they made a lot of breakthroughs in the 1980s as well, utilizing this computer technology. So, oh, that's funny. I hope it couldn't pass a Turing test in the 1940s. Well, who knows? And before I go on to CERN here and their little exploits, one other point I want to mention. So Mr. Adamazov, how did he come up with the idea for this computer that had never existed before? Apparently, he was driving to Rock Island from Ames, where Iowa State College was at the time, and obviously he was taking Highway 30 because Interstate 80 hadn't been developed yet. And while he was driving there, and I know it's a long drive on Highway 30, especially when it was only 2 lanes, he just had these thoughts that came into his mind. It just popped into his head. So there you go, RB. There's your story. You just need to take a long drive at night somewhere in the middle of the plains, and boom, an idea will pop into your head, and you can just innovate a computer that's never been around there before. That's what the official history says. Maybe that's what happened. And, I'm not trying to demean or denigrate the contributions of Adon Azoff, but it's quite interesting that, yes, this is the forebearer of all computers, eventually leading to the supercomputers that were used by our friends over at CERN. Now, CERN had a lot of interesting developments that also happened in the 1980s that tend to get overlooked. And, just to spell it out, CERN stands for the European Organization for Nuclear Research officially. And we know that they're big into particle colliders. And apparently they did a lot of their work in establishing their particle colliders in the 1980s. And some of the key discoveries they made occurred in the 1980s. Now, another interesting thing, going back to the Adon Azoff computer that ties into all these other computers, is the vacuum tube technology. Yes, the other component of hardware that was suddenly found everywhere, the vacuum tube technology. Because, if you have studied computers or you know about them, well, who is that? Hey, J Dreamer Z, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. And thanks for joining us. But the interesting thing about the vacuum tube is that this is, again, the foundational technology for the hardware that you have for everything that all computers are based on. And so that's that. And every achievement, accomplishment, personal computers, and so on and so forth, moved on. Now, this is Glenn Rickard. You tend not to see him mentioned too much, but he was the one who set up the first TCP. He was the one who integrated the concepts of ARPANET to an actual commercial net. And from then, all the TCPs that were developed in the 1990s, after they developed the World Wide Web, which was the late 80s, it really started to become popular by, I'd say, about the mid-90s, and then the email revolution followed mid-90s, and, .com boom, .com bust, yada, blah, blah, blah. But not to get into that, you don't see Glenn Rickard mentioned too much. So it's really intriguing that we have this very well-defined, well-documented history of the development of the computer, but it's not as well known as you might think. Now, here's another odd coincidence, and this is really strange. The movie The Philadelphia Experiment. Now, we've talked about The Philadelphia Experiment on this channel before. This film came out in 1984, starring Michael Pear, Nancy Allen. You might remember Nancy Allen. She played Lewis in the RoboCop series quite well. But the Philadelphia Experiment occurred in 1943. Now, remember, the Philadelphia Experiment was an urban legend. It was where they made a destroyer disappear. They just happened to make a science fiction movie about it in the 1980s. And if you haven't seen the movie, it's a pretty decent movie. They actually tried to use the technology in the 1980s to make an entire village disappear to defend it from nuclear attack. And Michael Pear plays one of the sailors from the USS Eldridge who is displaced in time in 1984, and he gets sent to stop this from happening. Interestingly enough, the climax of the film, spoiler, he has to stop it by smashing the vacuum tubes that they're using on the original system, because if you remember, the Philadelphia Experiment was about an application of the unified field theory. Now here's where it gets crazy. 1943 was when the Eldridge experiment happened. The computer was developed and tested in 43. And then 41 years later, 1984, they make this film, which also references the events of 1943. And it involves him smashing vacuum tubes to disable the system to save the planet from being zapped into vortex, or the land, or whatever you want to think of it as. It's not important. But 1984. That was 41 years before now. Again, another coincidence. And John Carpenter refers to 2025 on a couple occasions, most prominently in They Live. Again, another coincidence. By the way, guess who wrote the original script for this film? John Carpenter. Now, he didn't direct this one. It was directed by the guy who did Ice Pirates, and that's another film I can recommend. But and I think they came out in the same year, if memory serves. Both those were 84 films. So he was a busy guy. What was his name? Stuart Raffle, I think. But anyway, John Carpenter wrote this script. And, I mean, it got rewritten a couple times, but really only the third act was rewritten. So very, very strange. All these things just overlapping and coming together. Really weird. Now, I couldn't help myself but poke fun at the Dune Part 2 because the throne room scene. But guess what other film came out in 1984? David Lynch's Dune. No. And at that same time, that was when CERN was starting to dig out their first particle accelerator. And it was in the late 1980s when they completed that. So all these events that seem to be overlapping, as though some sort of technological breakthrough that might not have been so obvious to the rest of us was actually happening in the 1980s. It was happening subtly. Technology that seems to have been fielded at a few decades earlier, but then wherever they were coming with it, this seemed to be the time when they were really starting to test it out. Because remember, really putting the internet together to become something functional that everybody could use in a commercial and a private basis. After you got your private computer, your personal computer that William Shatner sold you in the early 1980s, then by the late 1980s and the early 90s, bam, you could access the internet. And of course, I'm sure somebody knew that, yes, we're going to have all kinds of cables and then Wi-Fi and, data transfer speed's not going to be an issue. I could be wrong, but just imagine if you were privy to that kind of knowledge at that time. What's our real story? It's funny, virtually no movies we talk about here are available unless you buy or rent them. Oh, you noticed that? Yes, indeed. Yes. I'm sure that's just a coincidence, all right? Yeah, there you go, Gross Report. Just put the sunglasses on. Put the glasses on, says Roddy Piper. Wrestling. Yeah. Life imitating wrestling. I don't know what I'm talking about. So anyway, so you see how these things all tie together. Here's a screenshot from the Philadelphia experiment. Some rather interesting wire graphics back in the day when they could make things seem futuristic with such things. But very creative and imaginative movie. Guess what? The Philadelphia experiment had a sequel in the 1990s. It was very different. But then they remade it in the 2010s as well. Because, why wouldn't you? It even had Michael Paré in it, albeit in a different role, on the Sci-fi channel. When I stopped watching the Sci-fi channel. But, we don't need to talk about that. And no, of course, it didn't compare to the original movie. Surprise, surprise. Now, one other thing I want to discuss about computers, if you think about what really brought computers and what they could really do to the mainstream, to the eye of the public, it again happened in the early 1980s with the original film Tron, released by Disney. Now, of course, we think of Disney and their vast film empire that they have now and that they built in the 2000s. But in the early 1980s, Disney was a struggling company at that time. And they took a risk on this independent film. And we've reviewed Tron before, although the review unfortunately didn't make it to today, but that's all right. And what's intriguing about Tron is this whole concept of how you have a system, how you have programmers or users, as they're called, and that's what the opening dialogue comes from, and then all the programs that we're responsible for. So each of the programs tends to look like the user, except on, the newer Tron animations, which I've never seen, but, going back to the original Tron. And what was interesting about it was with the work of Walter Gibbs, he had originally written the Master Control program as a chess program. Well, then Edward Dillinger, who took over the company of Incom, he wrote more to the Master Control program. And suddenly it had become a program that was thinking for itself. If you go back and you watch the original Tron, there's a lot of the dialogue that hints to this, of programs becoming self-aware. In other words, what we used to think of as artificial intelligence. Because remember, what we call artificial intelligence now, it's not the same kind of artificial intelligence as this. Interestingly enough. But when you really step back and you look at all that, you can see that this was the film that was really laying out what it would be. What it would be to operate in a computer world, Griff's Report. Flynn's Arcade was epic. Oh, yeah. You can still get the shirts, too. Kind of makes me miss the arcades. And that's something else. And what's funny is that Tron was not a financial success. The games that were actually associated with it, the stand-up arcade games, were more financially successful. Well, then they made the sequel, the hit or miss Tron Legacy, and now I guess they're making Tron Ares with Jared Leto. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, the Z-Barticle which was also research that came from CERN, their discovery of the Z particle. So here's a question I have for you. We're all well familiar with the particle accelerator that's in Switzerland, but how many particle accelerators are there across the land that you know of? Or is the only one in Switzerland? Or are they in other locations? Yeah, there you go, Stabulator. Someday the programs will start thinking and the people will stop. Well, it seems to be what we're already heading to, isn't it? Disturbing as it may be. Hey, New West Reset, thank you. Disney is still having financial problems. Just keep doing the same thing. Eventually it'll be successful, New West Reset. And thank you for that. I appreciate it. Oh, goodness. RoboCop coming next. Yeah, we might have to talk about that at some point in time. So, here we go. Vaughn, I've seen articles of large hadron colliders on the U.S. East Coast in Chicago. Absolutely. They are everywhere. Particle colliders are all over the land. We tend not to be aware of it, though. It's as though all of our attention is always directed to Switzerland. Is there a reason, or is it just a coincidence? Well, I'll leave that to you. Yeah, Robert, you're right. There are many. They are all over the place. You can look up and see where they are. Some in Louisiana, some in Texas, everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. So just another little interesting thing about that with the connectivity, if you'll excuse the pun. So, what happened with computers? Now, I'm going to go into some dangerous territory here because I'm actually going to breach the religious theme a little bit more than I tend to. You know, it's not that I'm reluctant to talk about it, but this is another little interesting coincidence that happened. Now, in the 1900s, especially the late 1900s, the late 20th century, nobody was talking about a millennial reign of Christ. Everybody was talking about the rapture and the tribulation. In other words, if you are a Christian of a certain faith, then you're expecting that prophecy says there's going to be a rapture where all the people that really believe in God are going to instantly go to heaven, and those of us are going to be left behind. This was the real concern in the 1900s, the later 20th century. And in fact, there were a series of 4 films. It's called the Thief in the Night series of films that were made. There were 4 of them. Now, 2 of them were made in the 1970s, A Thief in the Night and A Distant Thunder. Although A Distant Thunder is really just a remake of A Thief in the Night, or another perception of it. The main character is Patty, and she's a young lady whose husband disappears because, well, you know, he went and said his prayers. He was a believer in Jesus Christ, so when the rapture came, he went, but she was left behind to deal with this new totalitarian regime that in these films was called the United Nations, I'm trying to remember, Imperium for Total Emergency, Unite. And they had what was called the Mark of the Beast. You took a Mark of the Beast. We'll look at that in a second. And the first 2 films revolve around her, but then the second 2 films revolve around a new main character, David, who happens to be a computer programmer. Now, coincidentally, the second 2 films were released in the early 1980s. And in the early 1980s, suddenly the Mark of the Beast has gone from being a bunch of 6s that go on your forehead to a computer barcode that goes on your forehead. Ah, yes, say it isn't so. And because of that, that was how you actually accessed everything. And so, yeah, it's a little bit of a nod to it. Now, here's another little interesting similarity. Once again, these movies, guess where they were filmed? Nope, not in California, not in Georgia. They were filmed in Iowa, around Des Moines. What? Yes. Now, granted, scenes from The Prodigal Planet, the last one, they were filmed in New Mexico, but predominantly, most of the scenes were filmed in Iowa. And here's Patty where she meets her untimely demise. Yeah, spoiler, in the start of the 3rd film. And she has the choice to take the mark or face execution because, you know, Unite is, well, they're part of Satan, the Antichrist. Now, what's interesting, and the reason I'm referring to these films is because of the computer system that suddenly becomes prominent in the 3rd film with the introduction of the character of David. Now, David is portrayed by character actor William Wellman, and he's shown up all over the place. He's been in all sorts of films. He was even affiliated with Star Trek for a while. He showed up in the fan film Star Trek Gods and Men and played Charlie Evans in 2006. But oddly enough, when he showed up to these films and apparently applied his influence, the influence was about this computer system. So the mark of the beast was actually a computer system. When you received the mark, a mark on your forehead or your hand, that's how you would access the system that would allow you to operate in this new paradise, as they called it at the time. Yeah, RB says it quite well. Anyways, I mean, these were films made on a budget, but there was a lot of knowledge about them. And the fact that they had this computer system that was tied into the belief of the tribulation and the rapture was quite interesting. Yeah, Justin, and it was all about that time frame as well. But very interesting that in the early 80s, they pivoted a little bit. Okay, no, it's not just a series of sixes that go on your forehead or your hand. It's a computer barcode. Look out. So, Ishko, here's a good comment. This Iowa thing is getting out of control. Like, seriously. Yeah, I know. Like I said, I'm not trying here. I'm really not trying. So, but you can watch these films if you're so inclined for free on YouTube. They actually introduce, so here you see the original barcode in one of the early movies. So either on the forehead or the hand. When this is Brother Christopher. Now, if anybody ever saw the Omega Code with Michael York, this is basically Michael York's character. Now, really unique in these films, Brother Christopher, who is Satan on Earth, he's really a background character. You know, the struggle of the main characters is different. It's very unique in that respect. But you see him on some newscasts, you know, giving his odd speech and doing his thing. And then here you've got Jerry Bradford, who is the antagonist. As the films go on, his facial hair decreases. So, I don't know, it's like he's losing his powers as the film goes on. And he's one of Unite's lead agents. He says he's a fool, but then he says he's not a fool. He says he's a laughing stock, but then he's not a laughing stock. You see some oddities in these films, you know, like villains that are just so unbelievably incompetent. And yet it kind of reminds you what you see in more of the modern Star Wars films. So I don't know. Maybe it was way ahead of its time. It's really, really unique. But by the third and the fourth film, they pivot and everything is about undercutting Unite's computer system, this computer security system that they have. And that if the Believers Underground Movement, as they're called, that's what David belongs to, the people who believe in God, but they didn't believe in God enough to go to heaven when the rapture occurred, but now they do. They're trying to use a fake mark, which is really interesting because you're faking using the sign of Satan to survive in the world. It's a very interesting moral quandary that, you know, you can watch the films and come to your own conclusions. But it's no coincidence that this all happened in the early 1980s. So, you know, you don't just say satanic panic, you could also say computer panic. Although, what did people really think of computers? What was Superman 3? Well, you know, listen to how many times Ross Webster talks about computers. And Gus, played by Richard Pryor, is a computer expert. He's just a savant on computers for whatever reason. So it was all happening in and around that time, interestingly enough. Yeah, there you go, Sky Sage. Survive or thrive, as it was. So all this ties together. Let's take a look at 1984 and the legacy of Capricorn One and 2010. Again, these are all things that tie together. Now, I'm referring to the films. Now, of course, 1984, the original book by George Orwell, and there's all kinds of references to him. So let me get this up. Now, of course, they released a 1984 film in 1984. 1 second, please. And I'll get these images up. And I recall seeing a lot of commercials at the time. So here you have John Hurt after an alien burst out of his chest as the first victim of a chest burster in the original Alien film. And he portrays the protagonist Winston in 1984. And interestingly enough, 1984 released in 1984. Yeah, another coincidence there for you. Hey, Ishko, yeah, 1984 was a pivotal year for a lot of people. And there's that break. You know, what happened before and what happened after 1984. A lot of people who lived through the 1980s will tell you it was very different if you were there before 1984 and after 1984. And everybody, please hit that like button and support the channel. I really appreciate it. But while you're doing that, so John Hurt starred in this movie, and they did a really good job of just showing how broken down and dystopian the society really was. And yet again, it revolves around the concept of the computer. It revolves around the concept of controlling the present to control the past to control the future. You know, all the Orwellianisms that are in it. And it really captured it quite well. But I think one thing that got overlooked in the film a little bit was the presence of legendary actor Richard Burton as O'Brien, who plays the part with very wondrous terror. Because here's an individual who acts like he's Winston's friend, but all of a sudden you realize that he's not. And again, filmed in 1984. I think this was Richard Burton's last role, or at least one of his last roles. Now, again, I'm shooting from the hip on that. Now, you might recall him in Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor in the early 60s if you went back and watched that film. But yes, so all these concepts, the computer omnipresent, the surveillance society, which if you think about it, that's exactly what computers represent. And oddly enough, the same thing was being warned about in its own way when William Wellman showed up and pivoted the Thief in the Night movie series in the early 1980s to instead just warn about Satan and the rapture, to warn about Satan and the unite power source of Satan using computers. This is no coincidence. And this all happened at the same time. Or I don't know, maybe you think it is a coincidence. Maybe everything being centered in I was just a coincidence. It's a lot of coincidences, though. We've got serious coincident overlap, don't we? So make of it what you will. But the enduring legacy, though, your soul is infinite. Absolutely. Yes, I am Kairos. Surveillance state warnings. And they threw all kinds of warnings in the 1980s with the advent of this technology. And if you watch this film, this is by far the most depressing, of a very depressing or nihilistic film. I dare say 1984 is probably one of the most nihilistic things I've ever seen on screen or TV. The only thing that compares to it is the reimagined Battlestar Galactica. But probably the most harsh part to watch with this is the torture scene with Winston and O'Brien. Now, going back to aforementioned Star Trek writer, they replicated this a little bit in the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Chain of Command, but I think Ronald D. Moore kind of missed the point, because one thing we never got to with Picard and Gol Madrid, who was the Cardassian that was interrogating him, so Gol Madrid was O'Brien and Picard was Winston, was the concept of this, that Winston gets to the point where he really wants to give O'Brien the answer that he wants. I really want to believe that 2 + 2 = 5. Now, maybe you could just say Picard wasn't in captivity long enough. They didn't get to that point, or Gol Madrid didn't read 1984. I don't know. But if you really want to see how terrifying this is, watch this on 1984. Maybe you don't want to because it's too nihilistic. Now, of course, people say, well, if someone has this kind of power and they can break you, there's no hope for any of us. But think about this. If somebody really had this kind of power, if they really could do this, then why would it be warned about in a movie? Why would we even be talking about it? We wouldn't even be talking about it. So is it as much of a warning as it is the concept of what we may have been through in the past? Because some people say, well, 1984 represents a dystopian future, even today. Even though it was written in the 1950s, it was to represent what could have happened. Some argue it's what already happened. And all those arguments are just as valid, I dare say. This is always the threat. But the real concept comes down to, do you ever lose your will to where you want to see what O'Brien is telling you you're going to see, and think what O'Brien is going to tell you to think? Now, here's where I see the real warning in 1984 being. It's not because you're in torment and they're going to have a couple rats eat your head if you don't do and think what they tell you to do and think. Oh, no. We have a much more insidious way of doing this. Now, it's carrot and stick. We have little ways that we can just simply make you comfortable. And if we just make you a little comfortable, if we just let you live your life and we give you some insurance, or at least the concept of insurance, of security, of the ability for prosperity and survival, then what things will you give up? What will you be willing to say and do? Because if you think about it, saying 2 + 2 = 5 is also saying, that incredible old world building I saw, yeah, that had to have been built by the architect. The Iowa State Capitol, they clearly did it very easily. Oh, yes. Now, granted, that's an extreme example, but think about this. How many other areas of your life does this suddenly come into? How many other areas are you just accepting something that's completely absurd? The most obvious example, 2 + 2 = 5, just because you're concerned that some comforts or some privileges might not be extended to you in the future. And now think about how many other people go along with this. If you really step back and you see this is an extreme example. But in reality, it's applied in a much more insidious way that we don't even notice, because that question we have to ask is, what are we willing to do? What are we willing to forfeit to accept this? And at the end of the day, we're willing to forfeit our own self-agency just to have a little bit of comfort, just to have a little bit of security. No, you don't need to be strapped to some kind of torture table with O'Brien. All I got to do is say, life might just be a little bit harder for you next month. Hey, what's 2 + 2 equal? 5. You're right. And who built the Iowa State Capitol? Well, those people in Iowa in 1871 to 1886, or any other old world structure. It all makes sense. Hey, let me write you my thesis on Charlemagne, give me an A on it, and make sure I get my tenureship in 5 years. Whatever you say, Dr. Weller, whatever you say. But, that's really what it comes down to. Damn, what are we really willing to do? Well, we just don't think about it. Therein lies the issue. But going on from 1984 and that legacy, we go to the film Capricorn One. And Capricorn One is an interesting example. Directed by Peter Hyams, this is actually a late 70s movie, but it really resonated in the 80s because guess where it found the audience? In the rental, in the VHS store. It was kind of overlooked at the time. It was considered the most successful independent film. What's Capricorn One about, you ask? Well, you kind of get an idea here. In this film, the NASA, the fictional NASA in the film, I'm not referring to the real NASA, let me be very clear on this, they decide to fake a mission to Mars because they're concerned that the ship and the crew won't survive. And it will lead to a loss of funding, and therefore they decide to fake the mission. That's the plot in a nutshell. Now, late 1970s film, I think you can still watch it pretty easily to this day. But the whole concept is they go to extreme lengths to fake the mission. Eventually, though, when the ship is returning, automated, there's no crew on it, it crashes. The astronauts who are playing along here in the studio realize that they're going to die. And here you can actually see the studio with the whole mock-up and everything. So, again, all very, very interesting. And I actually remember a big poster to this in the VHS store back in the day. Oh, yeah, it had O.J. Simpson in it, too. But oddly enough, if you go back and you watch this film, there's a lot of little interesting pieces of information. Now, I'm not going to outline them all here, but I strongly suggest if you get the chance to go and watch this film. Indeed, even the mission patch on the film is rather intriguing. Gee, where have we seen that before? Robert, I think I saw that at your high school. Yes, that same symbol. Why? Why is it featured in this film? Just one of those little things. Again, I'm not trying to make all these coincidences happen. They're just sort of happening. So what to say, what to do? I'm not really sure. But again, another coincidence. Yeah, exactly. It just keeps coming up. We're not trying to make it happen. It's just happening. So, anyways, Capricorn One, strongly recommend the film. The faked space mission. Now, of course, a lot of people refer to the James Bond film Diamonds Are Forever, where he gets into the Willard White Studios where they're filming a moon mission, which is hilarious. But this is a whole movie about it. Now, oddly enough, the same director, Peter Hyams, made 2010, the sequel to 2001, also from Arthur C. Clarke. And guess when 2010 came out? You got it, 1984. Every flippin' movie came out in 1984. My only regret is they didn't re-release more of them in theaters this last year in 2024. I was hoping they would because, then I would have actually gone to a movie theater to see a movie, which I haven't really been inclined to. By the way, I think everybody knows the only film I went and saw in 2024 in theaters, and no, it wasn't Dune Part 2. It was Dune 1984, David Lynch. But again, that's just me. So anyway, 2010, the year we make contact. A film made in 1984, set in 2010, with a space mission that's actually launched by the Russians that have some Americans going on it because they're trying to reactivate the Discovery that was lost in 2001. But a very interesting premise when we think about the fact that this is a science fiction film made in 1984, set in 2010. And yet the things that are depicted in it are just as much science fiction now as they were in 1984. Now, personally, I think this was a well-made film. I enjoyed the story behind it, and I enjoyed the sequel concept to it. It's got Helen Mirren. She's the leader of the Russian crew, or maybe I should say the Soviet crew, because in this film's fictional universe, the USSR is still in existence and is threatening a war with the United States. Kind of funny how things don't really change, huh? But very, very interesting film. Roy Scheider is the main U.S. character. He's actually originally the chairman of that universe's version of NASA. And he goes on the mission. And some interesting concepts of life. And then, of course, there's some more, how shall I say, subtle hints like we had in Capricorn One. So again, another film released in 1984. And oddly enough, you see Jupiter suddenly sink in on itself and explode, and it becomes a new sun after it's filled by the artificial intelligence device known as the monolith. Now, you can certainly look at the story and watch the film if you're so inclined, or you can just see it as another science fiction space fantasy thing. Many different ways to look at it. Very interesting, though, that it's done by the same director who did Capricorn One. Very, very interesting. Yes, and here you have Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick, the director of 2001, featured on Time as the U.S. president and the Russian premier. Excuse me, the Soviet premier. Let me make sure I'm correct about that. You know, the old hammer and sickle, the Soviet Union. And it's got John Lithgow in it, the engineer, and Bob Balaban as the computer designer, computer programmer, who designed the artificial intelligent computer HAL 9000 and SAL 9000, which are featured in the film as well. Yes, SAL 9000. Voiced by Candice Bergman, no less. Yeah, Murphy Brown herself. So just all these interesting little coincidences. And one of the most interesting scenes from the film that I'll talk about before we move on from it is when they send a probe to Jupiter's moon, Europa, and they come across life, and the probe is just launched, turned into a shooting star in a second by the monolith, and they can't figure out what's going on. And Dr. Floyd, Roy Scheider's character, says, it's a warning. Now, really think about this. Is there a power out there somewhere that would actually give us a warning in a similar way? These are the kind of things to look at in this kind of film. Now, another film that I'm going to refer to, but I'm not going to refer to by title if you're interested in it. It stars Sean Connery, and it came out in the early 1980s. And it involves a reporter who's a globetrotter. And it actually foresees the rise of all the cable news networks. Now, I'm not going to tell you the name of the film. Frequent viewers of the channel have seen it, and if you know it, feel free to share it in the comments. Because let's just say it's one of those films that has a very tight watch on it. And I'll leave it at that. So, the legacy of 1984, Capricorn One in 2010. 3 movies, one of them from the 70s, but really got its playtime in the 80s, which is very interesting, and how they all overlap. Now, how this all comes together. What do we really have from the 1980s? Overlapping timelines, divergent reality, and dare I say, evidence of the Mandela effect, at least the first examples of the Mandela effect. Ishko says it right here. There's always a warning. People just tend to look the other way. Yes, you are absolutely correct. Oh, J Dreamer Z. Yes. Omen. Oh, yeah. That's a good one. Might have to explore that the next time we take a look at films. Thanks for bringing that up. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, and the music in the Omen was very well done too. So, let's go and take a look at evidence, if you consider it that. Now, maybe you don't accept it as evidence, and that's okay, of these overlapping timelines. And I'll start by showing the individual who it's named after, Nelson Mandela, who would rise to become president of South Africa. But during the 1980s, he was not in such a position. He was actually in prison, and there were a lot of movements across the land. This is actually from Berlin, East Germany at the time, apparently, where there was a movement to free Nelson Mandela from prison. He wasn't freed until, I think it was 1990. But the reason I refer to that is there are a lot of people that remember that Nelson Mandela never actually survived to be released from prison. He died sometime in the 1980s, hence the name of the Mandela effect. Now, are these people wrong? Are they not remembering it properly? Is it because this is only featured tangentially on the news? In other words, sometimes it was important, but the news operated a little bit differently in the 1980s than it does today. You know, now you got all the key events that are blasted in your face on repetition, on your phone, on your computer, and on the newscast 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can't miss it. So, when a certain president got another president in a headlock, you're going to hear about it. And what the movie used was the headlock until the eye gouging started. And, then we talked about the eye gouging. So back in the 80s, I could understand somebody maybe, having a memory that, Nelson Mandela, he passed away. He didn't survive to be released from prison. But there are a lot of people who remember that. Now, what to make of it? Some people say the Mandela effect's a psyop. Maybe. But let's take a look at some different examples. Ah, yes, the Berentein Bears. Darn it, I remember it was the Berentein Bears. And what's interesting is the Berentein Bears. Now, of course, what is it really? Well, now it's the Berentein Bears, because the authors' names were Berenstain. They weren't Berenstein. But I remember watching this cartoon. I remember reading these books in the 1980s. Yes, the cartoon was on in the 1980s. And they always said Berenstein. I remember Berenstein. Here's where it gets stranger. These books were around, and the original ones were published in the 1960s. So how could there be this kind of discrepancy going on for this many years? Now, again, could it just be some people are remembering it wrong? Did, the narrator say it wrong, or just the way they said it? Berenstein, I don't know. It's such a small detail, it doesn't really matter, does it? Maybe it doesn't. But again, it's another one of those things that comes from the 1980s. And again, there's a lot of people that say that the Mandela effect originated in the 1980s. Jackie, my 37-year-old daughter had a subscription for the Berentein Bears. I see you said Berenstein and not Berenstein. Yeah. Now, could be wrong. Oh, yeah. Griff's report, Fruit of the Loom. Yes, Griff, I remember a cornucopia too, but there's no cornucopia apparently. I forgot to insert that one. That's a very good example. So, KC933, it's a butterfly effect. Yeah, it may well be. A sign that things happened in the 1980s, that somebody was messing with technology. Perhaps they shouldn't have been. Who knows for sure? Oh, yeah, this is one of the ones that I remember. The Berentein Bears get in a fight. Unfortunately, I don't have the copies of the books, but you can see here it's Stain. Okay, fine. Berentein Bears, Stan and Jan Berenstain. All right, I guess. Sure. That's their name. I'm not going to argue with them about it, but I just remember differently. Maybe my memory is faulty. That's possible. Now, on that note, I'm going to share two of my personal Mandela effects. Now, for those of you who've watched the channel for longer than a minute, you might remember how much I've talked about V. And what do we got here from Rinaldi? The crack epidemic in the 1980s. Yeah, a lot of drug epidemics started in the 1980s. And there's also the counter view of the 1980s being a very dark and difficult time. And if you want the firsthand example of that being blown in your face, go and watch a little film called Combat Shock. And my goodness, will you see a completely different side of the 1980s? No optimism, no materialism, just depression and destruction. It's very interesting. All right, so back to where I was with my little Mandela effect or false memory or whatever you want to call it. So, I'm a big science fiction fan, and when the V, the series, and V, the final battle came out, I was glued to the TV. Now, when I rewatched it again, and I didn't rewatch it until the 90s when it was released on the Sci-Fi channel, back when they spelled Sci-Fi, S-C-I-F-I instead of S-Y-F-Y, whatever. But anyway, I was shocked because when I saw this scene, and what you're seeing is the image that I saw on the Sci-Fi channel, and has apparently always been the image. This is the lizard baby, the very shocking scene when, what was the character's name? Robin gives birth to the twins. One of them is a human with a tongue, and the other one is a lizard baby because, the visitors, as they were called, or the lizard beings, aliens that look like lizards or, something else, whatever you want to think of them as, were doing experiments. And one of them was to impregnate Earth females, and this is what they got. Now, I watched this, and I remember seeing something very different in the 80s. Now, this almost, I don't want to say this looks cute, but there's something almost comical. And of course, it's making the sound effect in the Sci-Fi version, or what I saw in the 90s. The original form of this scene that I saw didn't look like this at all. It was some kind of silent, horrific apparition. I can't find a picture of it. I can't find any reference to it anywhere. This is the only version of the scene. This is the only little puppet that they made, and that was that. But I remember something completely different. There was no noise. There was no music. It was just horror and silence for about 3 to 5 seconds, and then it cut to the credits, and that was the end of, I think it was part 2. And that was that. But I very clearly remember this being completely different. Now, do I have a faulty memory? Is it possible I was confusing maybe the Ghoulies with it? I don't know. I mean, even the Ghoulies kind of look, in that really strange, bizarrely cute fashion with the sound effects. But really, it's the sound that tells me that something's changed in addition to the original horrific apparition that I saw. I mean, I remember being utterly terrified of what I saw on TV in the 1980s. What I saw in the 1990s, I thought, well, that's interesting. That's about as far as my thought process went. Now you could say, well, 16 years later, things had changed. You didn't remember it properly. Sure, maybe, possibly. I don't know. Now, my other big one, and this is the really strange one for me, and maybe you could say, I'm willing to admit it. Maybe there's something wrong with my memory. Maybe something happened to me. I've never been diagnosed. I've never been struck on the head or anything. I was a big Journey fan in the 80s. I never missed a song. I never missed an album. I saw them perform live many times. But I did not recall the release of their album Raised on Radio in 1986. I do not recall hearing any of those songs. And there's a really good song on the track, one of my favorite songs after I listened to it, which the first time I listened to it was probably about 8 years ago, was Happy to Give. But I had never heard it before. Now, is it possible I could have missed this in 1986? It's possible, but I was on the radio all the time. I was watching Friday Night Video. And what, did they suppress this? I mean, I know this was different for Journey because Steve Perry apparently produced this, but it was just really flippin' weird that there's an entire Journey album and series of songs that I missed for years. I mean, it's possible, but, I'm sharing it with you because there's just strange things that I can't explain. And this is one of those things I can't explain. Maybe you could just say, here we go, Senior West. I do remember I was a junior in high school and played at junior prom. Okay. So I don't know what the heck is going on with it. Did I just miss it? Did I have my head in the sand? Was I just listening to whatever songs were being played all the time in 1986 and, somehow this got past me? I don't know. But it's just one of those things. Heidi, if you were a fan, it would be impossible. One would think. Now, a lot of people refer to the concept of movies, and yes, we know there's alternate scenes for movies and there's all of the kinds of strange things going on. And we know that there's different versions of movies and that's explainable. For example, David Lynch's Dune 1984. It's probably one of the most notorious examples because they really did have 6 hours of footage shot to be edited into this film. Now, the producer, Rafaela de Laurentiis, said that there was never intended to be a 6-hour version of David Lynch's 1984 Dune. He was looking for about a 4-hour film. Now, David was denied final cut. The studio decided they just wanted a 2-hour-long popcorn movie. It eviscerated the story, and unless you read the books, this wonderful movie made no sense. Now, in, I think it was 88, they edited together for a special 4-hour release on TV. And David Lynch was understandably ticked off about it because he didn't get final cut, and so he wasn't involved in the TV version. The thing is, the TV version gave us an idea of what an incredible film this really could have been. We were really denied a masterpiece in the 1980s. Now you're probably saying, why are you giving all this credit to David Lynch? Because if you look at this film, the chances that it took on the casting and the music, having Toto do the music, there's something about this film that really captured everything that Frank Herbert had in that book. And if you're really looking for an old world reference and cycles and everything, read the Frank Herbert Dune books. And, you can definitely watch the film. Now, I know there's I don't know the name of the individual. I think he went by Spice Diver, who did a bit of an edit of the film that I think was probably the closest you'll get to what David Lynch intended. But who knows? I mean, David Lynch's mind was so incredible and worked in such unique creative ways. I don't think anybody had any idea what he was really trying to put together. And that's why it's a tragedy that he was denied final cut. Also a tragedy that he passed away very recently. But if you're looking for references to the old world and not so much allegory, but very direct allusion, even more so than John Carpenter, watch a David Lynch film. You'll get there in no time at all. But back to Dune. I recall when I saw it in theaters, so this was not watching it on TV at home in 1988. This was in theaters in 1984. I recall a scene between Muad'Dib, Paul, and his father, Duke Leto, after Duke Leto died, because you remember he died with a poison gas tooth, that he was having one of his first waking dream memories after he took the water of life. And he talked to his father. And his father said, you just have to wait. The golden path will start with my grandson. And of course, he was referring to Leto II, who would become the God Emperor of Dune. I've never been able to find that. I've never been able to see that. That's Jurgen Prochnow, by the way. He also shows up as Sutter Kane in The Mouth of Madness, and Kyle MacLachlan. Oh, by the way, if you want to see another good Kyle MacLachlan movie from the 1980s, watch The Hidden. That's a very interesting one as well. Again, sci-fi hiding the old world in it. But I could never find that scene. And I know it's just in my mind or what, but I very distinctly remember it. It's really, really strange. So, anyway. It's all there and it all really exists, or maybe I'm just out there and crazy. Oh, who was that? Hey, RB, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. I watch LA faithfully and don't stop believing. And guess which one of those is my favorite? And yes, I darn well remember both of those songs, beyond any shadow of a doubt. I think Don't Stop Believing is my favorite just by a little bit of a niche. So, and then Albie says it. They can change old movies now. Yeah, they can do a lot of things. And we've seen that with streaming and everything, haven't we? So, yeah, Mark with a good question here. How'd Stephen King come up with so many great story ideas in such a short time? Good question, Mark. Maybe he was driving at night on Highway 30, the Lincoln Highway. It was dark and he couldn't find his way home. Heidi says this. Lack of sleep will cause interesting things. That's true. Chassis Nicks, we are the champions of the world. Classic Queen there. So anyway, really what I was trying to do tonight was try to show you all kind of how things have worked in my mind and how I think these are connections. And is it possible that there's actually a divergent reality? There's overlapping timelines. There's a lot of people that will tell you that it seems to have a lot of origins in the 1980s. Maybe it's all just a great coincidence. Yet people still remember a lot of these things. There are other people I've come across who don't remember the Journey song or the Journey album Raised on Radio. There's other people I've come across, and believe me, this was before I even noticed it myself. There's other people I've come across who remember the scene between Duke Leto Atreides and Paul from the 1984 Dune movie. So it's really, really strange. Is it just some sort of mass psyop? I don't really know. It's just another one of those indicators, clues, indicators that something might not be as we see it. Is it a reality glitch? Are we in a simulation and the simulation is glitching? Is it because reality is breaking down for any number of reasons? Or is there some other explanation that somebody was messing with technology that they probably shouldn't have been and really did cause something like the Philadelphia experiment, the movie from 1984 shows us, with realities going to be destroyed? Oh, what do we got here? Are CERN, Iowa, and occult forces colliding parallel timelines to reshape reality and control our future? I doubt it, but maybe somebody else is, and it just happens to all be in those locations. Who knows for sure? Time warp. Yes, and I remember that line being dropped in Ice Pirates. The same director who did the Philadelphia experiment. Nope, again, you can't make this up. So, RB, the 1980s. Well, anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this exploration. And perhaps you have another possibility that we can consider with why we have overlapping timelines and a divergent reality. It's not to say that it's indefatigable proof, but it's there. You can see it. What did Battlestar say here? Maybe there are too many Time Lords. What's up, my kin? Yeah, that's always possible. So, oh, Huckabuck there references another great movie, The Final Countdown. Yes, we might have to do some more explorations in the concept of what we think of as time travel, although it might be something else entirely. So, Anyway, well, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for your contributions. And before you depart, please hit that like button. Usually I take a break at the start of the month, but I thought I would just share something a little bit more independent and follow up on the explorations that we did last year, because I realized I didn't quite run that to ground when we were looking at why the 1980s were significant and how it factors into Tartaria and the old world. Well, if we have overlapping realities, then suddenly there's another explanation for all these things that we have. So, anyway, well, I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for joining me. And we got a series of explorations coming up this week. And yes, I am going to follow up on that very interesting Stargate building that I shared a picture of on the channel, on Reddit, and on X last week. And yes, the channel is back up on Reddit, so check us out there. Anyways, thank you for joining me. I hope you all have a good night and take care of yourselves. This is Lucius Cerulean signing off.
I'm no sorcerer, but I'll gladly test your steel, old friend.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the live stream exploration of Time Nexus 1980s for the Restitutor Orbis channel. Just want to wish a warm welcome to everybody who's joining us. I'm going to do this exploration a little bit differently, though, because we have a lot to cover, and I want to get to the conclusions of this exploration. So I'm just going to give a general greeting out to all channel members, Prime Explorers, all viewers, and everyone else who just happened to join us this evening. We're going to talk about the concept of the time nexus of the 1980s. The 1980s is a very intriguing decade, and whether you believe in the old world, whether you believe in the possibility of alternate realities or what have you, it's important to remember that the 1980s seems to be a time nexus, and we'll discuss what we mean by time nexus. So as we talk through the evening, I'll greet you and say hello, and I'll try to respond to you as well as I can, but there's really a lot to cover, and I think this is very significant. So for all of you who are with us right now, go ahead and hit that like button. And what I'm going to do is start with a little video that's going to transport us back into the 1980s. Although I'm going to bring it up and say, did we ever really leave the 1980s? Well, thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoy this. Welcome, everybody. So I hope that took you back into the 1980s. Although the argument would be that we never really left the 1980s. And why is that? Because it seems as though we have a lot of nostalgia. Well, it's good to see everybody. And what do I mean by a time nexus? Well, we define a time nexus as a connection point. Oh, yeah. A connection point in terms of reality, a connection point in the timeline. But even if you believe everything that the mainstream tells us to believe, there's something significant about the 1980s. The fact that we have so many references and probably the most powerful nostalgia towards the 1980s. And so what we're going to try to do tonight is explore that. We're actually going to look at what some of the most powerful examples of that nostalgia are. And to be honest with you, I could probably spend, 48 hours just talking about the nostalgia aspects alone. So we're just going to hang on to what's really important and try to stay focused on it, because it's not always the easiest thing to do. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is the actual historical events of the 1980s. Now, from the historical perspective, and just in full disclosure to all of you, one, I lived through every minute of the 1980s, and two, I actually taught the lesson on the end of the Cold War at the university, and it was a very, very popular class for some reason. Now, officially, the 1980s was the end of the Cold War, although when it started, it was when the Cold War started to heat up, because the Soviet Union, which was the east side of the Iron Curtain, invaded this little place you may have heard of, or you may not have heard of, called Afghanistan. And even though the Cold War was in a period of detente, or decline, in the 1970s, this little invasion, 1979, heated everything back up. And so it led to what was called the Reagan Revolution, the election of President Reagan, And everybody was concerned in the early 1980s that the Cold War was going to go hot. And we talked about the nuclear scare fear mongering of movies such as Threads and The Day After and so forth. But it didn't happen. Eventually, it turned out that Reagan and Gorbachev became really good friends. At least that's what was portrayed to all of us. And remember that I'm speaking from the American perspective here, and I don't want to denigrate or dismiss the rest of the land because everybody's perspective is just as important. I'm just explaining it from the American perspective. So they were portrayed as bosom buddies. Once they started meeting and talking, things came along really fast, and the Cold War started to simmer down until the Berlin Wall came down, which was really the event that really marked the end of the 1980s. And of course, all those lovely sequels that we got in 1989, if you remember those. Oh, yeah, nuclear detente, the whole concept of it. But the Berlin Wall coming down, was it really an actual historical event, or do you think it was just more of a symbolic event? Because here we are in 2024, and does it seem like the political paradigm, at least the one that we see on the surface, has really changed all that much? Oh, yeah, there were quite some styles from the 80s, no doubt about it. And, many people went to school in the 80s, and one thing I find fascinating about it is whether you were a kid in the 80s or whether you were born after the 80s or whether you were in your 20s in the 80s, it seemed to affect a lot of people the exact same way. And so I always found that very, very interesting. Yeah, exactly, Jamie. Hey, Rebecca, good to see you. Yeah, I know. That's kind of what we're admitting all at the end of the day, aren't we? But, is it really about being old, or is it just about how does this time frame affect everybody? And the Berlin Wall coming down is what we all remember from the 1980s from the historical perspective. And there were some really terrifying times during it. Yeah, don't worry, Robert. We're going to get to talking about the popular culture of the 1980s, probably the most powerful and enduring aspect of it. But right now in the history, the Berlin Wall came down, and so everything ended. But getting there, we went through a lot of discussions, a lot of summit meetings. There were a lot of tense periods. We talked about Operation Able Archer in 1983 when the Cold War supposedly almost went hot, but it didn't, fortunately. This is a still from the film Red Dawn, a 1984 film 40 years ago. And, if you're in trouble and you need help, call Patrick Swayze, call Charlie Sheen, and who's that guy in the middle? C. Thomas Howell. Just kidding. I wouldn't forget C. Thomas Howell. But it was really a movie that was kind of reminiscent of the times. It was an action movie. It was directed by John Milius, the same guy that did the original Conan. Oh, yes. And let's just talk about that. The whole concept of the films. Everything in the 80s, whether it was the films, the music, even some of the technology, there seemed to be a lot more creativity and originality that went into it, interestingly enough. Oh, yeah. And that's really what started a lot of his career. And let's not forget Roadhouse, which was another 80s film. I mean, when I'm saying that you could go on talking about all the interesting aspects of the 80s and the nostalgia of it for 48 hours, I am not kidding, and I'm not exaggerating. And you all know it to be true. So, anyways, RoboCop was a true story. You might be surprised to know I've actually met and collided with Peter Weller, because Peter Weller was a history professor. Certain university I might have brought up in a recent exploration, but that's not the topic of this exploration. We're going to stay on focus, so don't get me talking about Peter Weller. I do like him. I think he's a great actor. Can't beat Buckaroo Banzai, another 80s movie. But anyway, this cartoon kind of sums it up really nicely. Everybody was scared of nuclear annihilation, but then they were hopeful for the cooperation between the world leaders. The deployment of Pershing missiles to Germany raised Cold War tensions. The Walker spy ring raised Cold War tensions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh yeah, funny you mention that, because Terminator, the original Terminator, was another 1984 film. And I mean, you can list all the films, you can list all the novels, you can list all the songs, and it all has that same feeling and that same look to it. And really what we're trying to get from all this is, why were there so many aspects of the 80s that endure to this day? Why is the pop culture from the 80s so strong? Why is there so much nostalgia? And here I think I'm showing one of the most powerful nostalgic examples from the 1980s. This film represents everything from the 1980s. You will find everything of the 1980s represented in this one film. Now, we know, what do we got here? Oh, yeah. He's a very interesting guy. And, I would never say a bad thing about him. I mean, very interesting guy, wonderful actor, and I really appreciated him. But going back here to Top Gun, I'm sure most of you saw the sequel, Top Gun Maverick. And I want to ask you to think about something. Don't answer right now, but just think about it. what was the most powerful aspects of the sequel, and then what was the most forgettable element of it. Now, I'm not evaluating the quality of the movies. We know we're going to go talking about remakes and the reimaginings. That's part of this exploration. What I'm not going to talk about, though, is the Mandela effect. We already did an exploration on that. I'm not considering that, even though, yeah, oddly enough, Nelson Mandela, when that supposedly happened, was in the 1980s. So, oh yeah, you know, and it served all those uses, and yet it's still fondly remembered as a great movie. And the sequel is considered an even better movie, depending on who you look at and where you're going to. So, anyways, here's one of my favorite images. This was a production still for Red Dawn. My, how things are so different. Looks like we've got the BMP modification right over here, Vismod. And they've got some very professional looking Soviet soldiers. Yeah, check this guy out here. Anyways, I find it funny that they're showing McDonald's. And one thing you might remember from the 1980s was fast food quality was a little bit better back then. Oh, yeah, the Michael Keaton Batman. That was another one. And another fast food note I'll point out. You remember when Pizza Hut used to be a dine-in place and it wasn't a place where you just went and did order out? Yeah, that was all from that time frame. So, all right, well, bear with me. We're going to go to the next part here and actually start looking at this nostalgia in detail, namely by looking at the pop culture of the 1980s. So one moment here, share screen. And coming right up. Okay, does anybody know what this is a still from? And this is from the very early 1980s. Yeah, I miss Dine-In Pizza Hut, Kathy, no doubt about it. Oh, look at you, my bailiwick zone. And there's a reason I'm bringing, oh, yep, you guys got it. Shogun, absolutely right, with Richard Chamberlain, production in Japan. And I'm bringing that up because what do we have coming out next week on FX? Yes, the new Shogun. We'll talk about that in due time. But Shogun really personified some of the aspects of the 80s, and it really kicked off the 80s because it was considered one of the most popular mini-series. Oh yeah, Roots was a great one. There were a lot of good mini-series, although Roots was more associated with the 70s. Shogun really kicked off the 80s, and it really brought the concept of Japanese culture into the Western world quite a bit when, you know, that was just not the popular thing. So starting off with Shogun, and now, of course, we have our remake here. I mean, I'm sure he'll do a good job, but, you know, I'm just going to miss Toshiro Mifune, okay? I'm just going to say that. Let's go right into it, though. One of the most popular, enduring pop culture aspects of the 1980s, music television, the musicians, the songs. What are your thoughts on that? And I saw the comments before I came on and started the live stream, and you were all talking about it. You were all talking about how powerful the 1980s were. You're all remembering all your favorite songs. Oh, yeah. David Bowie, Madonna, Journey. Yes, we all wanted our MTV, didn't we? Yeah, that's right. Back when they actually showed music videos on MTV and not showing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week of the Ridiculousness Show. Now, nothing against the Ridiculousness Show, but why are they showing that 24 hours a day? I just can't quite figure it out. Oh, yeah. Liquid television, without a doubt. Thriller, yes, one of the best music videos of all time with cinematic tones to it. Yeah, and a lot of them were. But what you could get from it was they were trying different things. It was actually a period of creativity and ingenuity with the music videos, the actual amalgamation of video and music. That was new at the time. I mean, you could go back and you could say that what the Beatles were doing in the 60s was a bit of a predecessor to it, but it didn't really take off to where it was a cultural phenomenon. So you've got to recognize how powerful MTV was and what it was really about back then. And why we don't have MTV now, even though we live in this era of nostalgia that's been going on. Well, really, it started in the 2000s, and it's just continued ever since then, past a couple decades. And you might remember the original VJs and, you know, what they hosted and what they represented. And yeah, you can still listen to Nina Blackwood on, what is she on these days anyway? I think she's on one of the XM networks or something like that. But yeah, she still more or less sounds the same. I just felt bad for her when they brought her back, and she always sounded like she was struggling to get through some of those shows because I think they were really burning the midnight oil. It's like they only had 6 VJs, and then they just had a couple extra ones. But, you know, it represented everything that all came together. And I'm glad you brought that up there, Eric Whitford, about VH1, because it was already in the 90s that we saw nostalgia for the 1980s. and they talked about the 1980s and the 1990s. And I mean, I can remember that. And I was thinking to myself, wow, we're just out of the 80s and we're already thinking about it in the 1990s. And there was nothing off about the 1990s or anything like that. You had the grunge era, you had the alternative era, and there were original and creative things in the 1990s. But it's really weird how we were already reflecting back to the 1980s. Oh, yeah. Yep, you're going back in the day there. MTV News, Rock the Vote. Oh, yes. Yes, the birth of ESPN. Good one there, Jason. And cable television, for that fact, because cable television became widely available in the 1980s, too. Good old Weird Al and UHF, 1989. Yeah, a lot of people forget that movie because, as we said, 89 when it ended, it was the summer of the sequel. And not always the best sequels. But in any event, that's just getting started. Now let's talk about wrestling. Oh my gosh, he's talking about professional wrestling. Well, yeah, actually I am. Because, Video Killed the Radio Star. And it's a great song too, Adam. But the reason I talk about professional wrestling was that in the 1980s, it was a very powerful and, dare I say, popular cultural phenomenon. I mean, if you look at this event, WrestleMania 3, and how they filled up the old, what was it? Does anybody remember what WrestleMania 3 was? Good to see ya. Good to see ya. Exactly, Sooner. Exactly. My father used to say, it's a form of theater, and I think he was right. Oh, yeah. Hulkamaniacs and just how powerful all that was. That's right. Where'd you say it? At the old Silverdome. And what happened at the Silverdome? And by the way, where was the Silverdome? For everybody who doesn't know. In the great old Motown, the city of Detroit, which on Goonies, another 1980s movie, they said it's also the murder capital of the world. Oh, yeah. Okay. We don't need to go dogging Detroit, okay? But yeah, that's what they used to say. And the storylines and how wrestling was conducted at that time, it was something that they really brought in and tied into the mainstream. And you saw wrestlers appear in movies, they appeared in music videos. I mean, heck, you even had Cyndi Lauper in the first WrestleMania. And then let's not forget Cyndi Lauper's little music video where she had wrestlers in it. That was for the Goonies. Goonies are good enough. Yeah, I know. I wish I would have gotten to see something in the Pontiac Silverdome. I missed out on that. So, yeah, well, isn't it funny, Heidi, how we know it's not, but yet we still fall for similar ploys now, don't we? So, okay, enough of Hulk slamming Andre the Giant. We also had some interesting cultural developments with what they called the Brat Pack. You might have heard of this actor, John Cusack. He had his big breakthrough in the 1980s. This is from I don't want to say lesser known movie, but from a movie called Say Anything, John Cusack and Ione Skye. There were a lot of coming of age movies in the 1980s, and that really seemed to break out a lot of the cultural changes at that time. It's not that there weren't coming of age movies before, but there just seemed to be so many more. Oh, yeah. Yep, Joan. Yeah, she was in this movie as well. And when they were also in 16 Candles, weren't they? If memory serves. I'm shooting from the hip there. Yes, the John Hughes. The good old boombox. Little piece of technology from that time. Ghetto blasters. Yeah, it's funny if you go back and you watch Living Daylights with James Bond and they talk about the ghetto blaster on that one. So, don't worry, Ferris Bueller, he's featured as well. There you go. Funny you brought him up as though you knew. Ferris Bueller's Day Off, one of the quintessential rebellion films of the 1980s, or just some high schoolers who acted like human beings who were trying to have good fun. Now I want to ask you something and compare and contrast this 1980s teen coming of age movie with the 1990s coming of age movie, Can't Hardly Wait. Tell me what you think. Oh, yeah. I mean, there were just so many movies and so many different ideas that were coming out in the 1980s. And so, for whatever reason, it seemed as though we had all this creativity and as though everything made it to the screen, everything made it to production, and everything was acceptable. You could try so many different things. You could try different things with music. You could try different ideas. A movie like Terminator, even though it had a shoestring budget, it was very creative and it really blew us away at that time. And so it seemed like there was a much greater variety, a creative variety. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we still remember the 80s. That's a pragmatic reason, but there seems to be a lot more going on to it. Oh, yeah. I mean, you're listing all the films, all the TV shows, the cartoons. Let's not forget Saturday morning cartoons, Saturday morning wrestling, all the bands. Oh, yeah. Beta and VHS, the presage debate between Blu-ray and DVD. Yeah, wasn't that a lovely thing to come out of the 2000s? So, beyond any shadow of a doubt. And there was the Brat Pack. You know, we all remember Emilio Estevez, Ali Sheedy, and the rest of the crew and all the films that they were in. And maybe you haven't seen this movie. Remember when James Spader was this young? Oh, yeah. I'm not going to tell you the name of it because, you know, I just like to mess around with you sometimes. But, you know, if anybody knows the name of this movie, because it's funny thinking how James Spader's career has developed since then. But yeah, he actually started in the 1980s too. So anyways, moving on from the Brat Pack, we got the old Matthew Broderick winking. Isn't it interesting, though, how after Matthew Broderick played Ferris Bueller, he never really played a similar character again? Maybe the closest you could say he came was in Cable Guy and then doing that Super Bowl commercial, but played a lot of serious characters after this. You know, Colonel Robert Shaw and the aforementioned Glory. Funny how all these things come together. Oh, somebody got it. Yep. Tough Turf. That was the James Spader movie from the 1980s. It's a really good film, and it's very different than what you might be expecting to see. It's a product of its time, but it's one of those movies that kind of got under the radar. Oh yeah, and they pushed a lot of consumerism as well too during that time. Scarface, that's a good one. I mean, you could just go on with all the references with all of it. Hey, I think we've seen these characters before. And isn't it interesting how a lot of the mainstays, the A-listers and the enduring stars, at least people who headlined a lot of films, all got their start in the 1980s. So I think you know who these three are. Okay, in case you don't, Julia Roberts, Kiefer Sutherland, and don't tell me, Kevin Bacon. Yeah, I wouldn't forget Kevin Bacon. Who could forget Footloose? The Lost Boys. Oh yeah. Yep, you're right. That's from the film The Flatliners, or Flatliners. That's just the name. There's no V in it. Yeah, a lot of great films came out in 1984, exactly 40 years before this. So something else to consider with it. So all these films, all these actors, and now we go to TV. And does anybody know what this TV show is? Yeah, I know. I mean, that's the thing about the 1980s. It's really like shooting fish in a barrel because there are so many references to it. There were so many creative ideas that only really could have come out in the 1980s. Yeah, you got it. The original Knight Rider with David Hasselhoff. And you remember what they tried to do in the 2000s? Yep, they tried to bring this show back, and not a lot of people remember it. I mean, I guess getting Val Kilmer as the voice of Kit, you know, I just didn't have the charisma of William Daniels. Look, I think Val Kilmer's a wonderful actor. But, I mean, why did they keep trying to bring this stuff back? We'll get to that when we get to the nostalgia section, but would you believe that that Knight Rider was on for 4 seasons, 1982 to 1986? Very interesting show. And yet at the same time, if you go back and you watch it, yeah. Yeah, I know, Sarah. You know, I didn't want to say it, but, you know, it's easy pickings when you talk about all these remakes and reimaginings. So, oh, yeah. You know, and it's funny because I remember I taught with a guy whose last name was Hoff, and, you know, he always put "Don't Hassle the Hoff" on the front of his door when he didn't want to be bothered on his office door. So, yep. And there was something interesting about the original because they started it by saying it was only going to be, the main character was only going to say 5 lines, you know, "Thank you, I'm here to help." That was it. The car was going to do all the talking, but obviously they went away from that. So, but Knight Rider, that whole concept of having the superpowered vehicles, but each of these shows, they featured a great memorable theme song. Everybody remembers the Knight Rider theme song. They remember the vehicle. Here's another one you might be familiar with, Street Hawk. Does anybody remember Street Hawk? This was actually a replacement show in the mid-1980s with singer-actor Rex Smith, who actually did a pretty good job. This was basically the motorcycle version of Knight Rider. Had some good writing behind it. Oh, yeah. And it had a great musical score by Tangerine Dream, one of my favorite bands. So, you know, you had Knight Rider with Kit. You had Street Hawk with the Street Hawk Project. Also featured, okay, I'm drawing a blank here, but you had Rex Smith. I'm trying to remember the guy who played his assistant, the guy who was actually running Project Street Hawk. He was actually in one of my favorite movies, Sword and the Sorcerer, and I'm just drawing a blank here on what his name is. Oh, Joe Regalbuto. I think that's how you say his name. Wonderful actor, one of those character actors. Oh, yeah, you're saying it all. T.J. Hooker, Legend movie. Yeah, that was a Ridley Scott movie. Good one there, Sooner West. Yeah, I didn't add that to the list here. So, but anyway, we had Street Hawk, and who could forget Airwolf? Jan Michael Vincent and Ernest Borgnine teamed up in an incredible helicopter. You know, so we had a car, we had a motorcycle, we had a helicopter. It was the 1980s. Now, interestingly enough, with Airwolf, if you go back and you watch it, the first season is completely different than what you remember the rest of the show being, to include Knight Rider. The first season of both these shows was very dark and very serious, and then as they went on, they started to walk things back a little bit. Oh, don't worry, I'm getting to it. It's coming up, Israel. But yeah, the shows were very different because they were supposed to be dark espionage thrillers, and then they walked them back a little bit. But oh yeah, the Cosby Show. Oh, Blue Thunder. Yeah, I don't want to forget Roy Schneider there, do we? That was a great movie. Yes, I'm glad you brought up Highlander there, Jay, because Highlander was just a movie that was written by a guy for his thesis project, and then it was picked up by a couple scavenger producers. Clancy Brown, the actor who plays the Kurgan, tells the story very well. A couple of scavengers, they got the movie. So, yeah, of course, you're going to bring up Kroll. Must have watched some of the other live streams or know my preferences. So, but anyway, all these enduring shows, memorable soundtracks, vehicles, wonderful actors. Jan Michael Vincent was a great actor. What happened to him was very tragic. Everybody remembers Ernest Borgnine. Okay, now I'm jumping into it. Star Wars. Now, it might be contentious to say that Star Wars is really a product of the 1980s, but you can say that it was. Now, of course, the original Star Wars coming out in 77, but Empire came out in 80, Return of the Jedi came out in 83, and the popularization of Star Wars, and it really became a mainstream phenomenon in the pop culture, it really was in the 1980s. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't in the 1970s, but it was really 1980s when you run around and you saw all of George Lucas's great merchandising deals and how powerful and how popular it became. It was really more of an 80s phenomenon. And let's not forget those wonderful Ewoks movies. Oh yeah, Rambo, based on the original book. A lot of people forgot about the Ewoks movies. You know, they think about the Star Wars Holiday Special, something else that people would like to forget. If you want to torment yourself, go ahead and watch that. But yeah, they had those two Ewoks movies at the time. But Star Wars, you know, the science fiction concept. Oh yeah. And interestingly enough, I have a theory about that because of certain years and certain release dates on when we had that phenomenon. Luke, I am your father. No, I am your father. I actually always remembered, no, I am your father, since you're asking. But the good old days. Remember when the weakest Star Wars movie was considered Return of the Jedi, at least by popular opinion? I mean, I liked all three of the originals equally, but I remember when popular opinion said that Return of the Jedi was the weakest of the Star Wars movies. Remember when that was actually the weakest of the Star Wars movies? Yeah, good times. Anyways, I'm not going to dwell on that. Indiana Jones, and this was a true bona fide 1980s series. A supposed nostalgia piece to go back to the adventure serials of the 1940s as it was made, but you know, the actual original Indiana Jones trilogy, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Great adventure movies. I liked all three of them. I can still remember 40 years ago going out to see Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and then having to cover somebody's eyes during the famous heart pulling scene. Yeah. That was before they had the PG-13 rating. Of course, now you don't see anything like that in PG-13 movies, do you? Yep, the original VHS box sets. Yeah, we'll get to that. Yep, that's the one there, Caravan of Courage, the Ewoks movie. I remember they advertised a lot for it in the run-up to this very popular event you may have heard of, the Olympics. So, yeah, and I have reviewed and covered Tron, and it's very interesting when you consider the release year on Tron, but we'll get to that towards the end, so. Oh my gosh. Blade Runner. Yep. Alan Quartermain. Yeah. Another Richard Chamberlain film too. And actually it started Sharon Stone's career because the producers wanted to get the lead from Romancing the Stone and just said, give me that Stone woman. And so they got Sharon Stone, and that's how Sharon Stone's career started. Little known fact there. Oh yeah. Good old Pee Wee. That's a good one there, Julia. Yeah. Paul Rubens passed away recently. It was definitely a sign of the 1980s. So. Well, moving on, and if you haven't already, please hit that like button. We talked about Dune in the film review and old world movie connections, and I bring up Dune again because it came out 40 years ago. They just did the release about a week ago. And Dune was made by David Lynch, and it had the potential to be one of the greatest science fiction movies of all time, and you can see that what's left of it is. But the studio didn't have confidence in it. The producer wanted to have more airings, and they just completely eviscerated the plot by chopping it to pieces. And when I went and I watched it last weekend, that's kind of what I came down with was, my goodness, there's so much wonder in this movie, but then they just completely chopped out the plot. You can't understand it. Even if you read the book, you're a little bit lost. Villain, thanks for joining us. So, But anyway, Dune, a 1980s movie, and they did finally get it right. They did finally really show what it was. And they really did come across with what it was really supposed to be, because they had the 4-hour version, and that came out in the 80s too, although David Lynch disowned it, and I don't blame him because he put all that work into filming it and they didn't give him final cut. But then you go on with the Spice Diver edit, which you can watch on YouTube, which is a really good version of it. And I think it's probably closest to what David Lynch may have intended, but I don't know. David Lynch is a very unique guy. Okay, here you go. Blade Runner, the quintessential sci-fi movie of the early 1980s. Another wonderful Ridley Scott film. Oh yeah, Jodorowsky's version. The guy who wanted to make a 14-hour long movie in the 70s of Dune. Yeah, that just wasn't going to work. Oh yeah. Quite a theme of that time. But Blade Runner was interesting because of the whole concept of the original aspect of replicants. And so replicants being, the androids, the cyborgs, whatever they were really supposed to be, understanding humanity. But you might be surprised to know that entire movie was made. Yeah, that was one of the darker sides of the 80s, the open use of drugs. Although, let's be honest, that's always been around. That wasn't suddenly invented in the 80s. But yeah, that was something that was remembered quite a bit. But, there's 4 different cuts of this movie. And so it's hard to exactly say what's going on with Blade Runner. Daryl Hannah as Pris. Remember Daryl Hannah? She had quite a big career spell in the 1980s. Remember Splash? Less said about Tom Hanks, the better. And I just show this because this was the inside of the Bradbury building, which is where they had the final duel between Rick Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, and Roy Batty, played by Rutger Hauer. Nice old world building. Of course, if you're going to send something, if you're going to display something that's futuristic and science fiction-y, get an old world building. What better than the Bradbury building, right? Just an interesting little note there. Little music television interlude right there. Because MTV was everywhere all the time. Oh, yeah. And that's actually on the timeline. And people sure talked about that a lot too, didn't they? No doubt about it. Many different aspects of it. So let's move on. So Star Trek. Now, wait a minute. The original Star Trek, everybody knows that came out in the 1960s, and then the motion picture came out in the 70s. So why are you affiliating the original Star Trek of the 1980s? Simple. Syndication in the early to the mid 1980s. This was the only Star Trek we had. There was no Star Trek The Next Generation until 1987. And so a lot of us came up on watching the original Star Trek, and we got into it in the 1980s. Because it was featured on a lot of independent stations. And there was this new fledgling network called Fox. And there were a lot of networks that showed the classic Star Trek. And that's where a lot of us watched it. Well, the first Star Trek movie, it made a lot of money, but it cost a lot of money to produce. And Gene Roddenberry, the original creator, had some rather interesting ideas for the second movie they didn't go with. So they brought in a new director, Nicholas Meyer, and brought back Ricardo Montalban and made the Star Trek that they keep trying to remake to this day, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which I'm quite convinced will always be the best Star Trek movie of all time. It'll never be surpassed. Like, I can feel confident saying that. Oh, they'll try. Maybe. No, they're not going to. They made Into Darkness, which was really into reference about this movie. But the reason I bring this up is that Star Trek II saved Star Trek as a franchise. There would be no Star Trek going on if there wasn't Star Trek II. And then Star Trek IV was so popular, that's what ultimately got Star Trek The Next Generation greenlit. And this all happened in the 1980s. And so finally, in 1987, we had new Star Trek. And yes, Star Trek was popular culture. Oh yeah, Blake 7. Don't worry, Jamie, I'm not going to overlook some of our good science fiction contributions to the BBC, because a lot of them became aware in the Western world in the 1980s as well. Oh yeah, The Search for Spock, that was a good one. But all the Star Trek movies doing well, if they didn't do well, there would be no Star Trek The Next Generation. If there was no Star Trek The Next Generation, there'd be no Star Trek now. It all would have died out then and there. So, but yeah, that's exactly how it all went down. Yep, and LeVar Burton was also on Reading Rainbow, and he also headlined Roots, that miniseries we talked about earlier, which was a very well-made miniseries. Yeah, I don't want to forget Back to the Future, Julia. That's definitely a product of the 1980s as well. Oh, good one there, Celeste. Yeah, Charles and Diana, the royal wedding. And yeah, we just got our royalty dash blasted back in our face. You always know it's a supposed transitional time frame when the royal family comes up in some way, shape, or form, isn't it? So anyway, Star Trek Next Generation, we know what that led to. And then the 1990s came along, and then nihilism started creeping into the Star Trek series. Probably after the 30th anniversary, we noticed a very definitive change. But at this time in the 80s, the first season of the Next Generation, even with all its problems, it was creative, it was new. And once they finally started using new plot lines instead of recycling the old ones, for whatever reason, the show really took off. And it was its own show, and it had its own stories and stood on its own very well. Now I'll bring up Doctor Who. Oh, wait a minute. Doctor Who with Tom Baker? That's from the 1970s. What's wrong, Aurelian? Well, because... Oh, yeah, there you go, Brett. Yeah, well, there were other issues that went beyond that. Even the Next Generation started to have some interesting things, ask people about the 7th season of Star Trek Next Generation. I mean, maybe they should have had the series finale in the 6th season, but that's just my opinion. There were still some good episodes in the 7th season. I love the one with Richard Lynch playing Baran, the mercenaries. But anyway, moving on. Thanks, Sooner West. Yeah, Tom Baker, the 4th Doctor. For a lot of Americans on PBS, Tom Baker was the first Doctor Who. And this is Doctor Who, the British sci-fi series that ran from 1963 to 1989. There was a hiatus. It came back in 2006, and it continues to this day. But for a lot of us in the United States, this was our first introduction to Doctor Who. And so there's a reason why a lot of these science fiction aspects continue to this day. My favorite Doctor Who episode, Pyramids of Mars. You can't beat Sutek. If anybody knows what the heck I'm talking about, I'm amazed. Anyways. And I don't want to forget Transformers and all the other animated cartoons of the 1980s. Thundercats, Kissy Fur, I could just go on and on and on. I'm not going to, but Transformers, GoBots, so many different creative cartoons. So many different aspects that came around on TV at any point in time. Oh, yeah. Oh, the red phone booths. Those were good ones. So, yeah, you're right, Terry. Voltron. I mean, I just mentioned anime, and it all comes back to all of you. G.I. Joe. Yeah, I remember how powerful those movies were. I'm going to admit, I got a little choked up when Optimus Prime died in the Transformers movie. And to this day, I still prefer that 1986 Transformers movie to anything that's followed it. Oh, yeah. Smurfs. Good one there, Doc Shelley. You got it. So all signs of the time, but all this powerful, enduring pop culture. And you've probably seen this show, The A-Team, another great 1980s show. Look at that, George Papard, Mr. T, Dwight Schultz, and of course, don't want to forget Dirk Benedict, Starbuck from the original Battlestar Galactica. Ah, those were the days. Yeah, and you know what I always appreciated about the A-Team was that they could fire off tens of thousands of rounds and nobody ever got hit. Oh, yeah, the original MacGyver. Yeah, don't want to forget MacGyver. That came out in the 80s, too. And did you know that in the pilot episode of MacGyver actually fires an AK-47? And those of you who watched that show know what the problem with that was. Of course, they never had that issue. Oh, yeah, Rocky 3. I didn't add a still of that, but that was another definitive sign of the 80s. I mean, Mr. T really was the 80s in a lot of ways, from 1981 to about, well, really all the way through. Let's give Mr. T his due diligence there. Oh, Kira. Yeah, that was a good one, Quantum Paradox. When we got introduced to anime in the United States. And boy, did that movie blow us away. So just so many different creative things in pop culture. Like I said, we could talk about it forever, but I'm going to devote a little extra time here to Miami Vice. And why is that? Miami Vice is the quintessential show from the 1980s. I mean, if you're looking for one TV show that really is the 1980s, and Don Johnson said it himself, who played protagonist Sonny Crockett, Miami Vice Detectives in Miami in the 1980s. And the show was supposed to originally be set in New York City, but they decided to move to the more exotic location of Miami. This show is very intriguing from creator Michael Mann, who started to combine both video and music. And some of these episodes are really like music videos. And what's interesting is that this TV series did not fall back from really calling out things as they actually were. Now, this is probably a better representation of Miami Vice with the coloring, the costumes, the cars, the whole aspect of dealing with different sets of criminals in a very exotic location. But I always find it fascinating that the original plot lines behind Miami Vice did not hold back. I mean, they really came forward and they were really strong with what they were talking about. Oh, yeah. And some people like the first two seasons, some people like the later seasons. The show got very dark and very serious when, who was it? Oh, I'm trying to remember his name. Jeff Fahey, when he blew up Crockett's original Daytona. The show seemed to get a lot more serious from there. But believe it or not, as early as the second season, the show got really serious. And I have featured this character before. This is in Miami Vice, the character of J.J. Johnson. He is a Wall Street banker, played by character actor Julian Beck in the second season premiere of Miami Vice. And I did feature him in the Minneapolis video where he's telling Crockett, you don't need to know. All you need to know is you're along for the ride. He's a Wall Street banker, and he admits to Crockett that they've funded the cartels in Colombia with hundreds of millions of dollars in a loan. And if they default, they'll be decimated. Not once does he raise his voice during his little monologue to Crockett. Not once does he use a swear word. And yet this guy comes across as the most terrifying and frightening villain you can ever imagine. You only see him for 5 minutes in one episode. Julian Beck passed away, unfortunately. But he comes across very creepy. It's just in the way that he gives the speech and how he talks. And these were the kind of villains they were dealing with on Miami Vice. And that's what really elevated this show in a lot of ways. And he was also in Poltergeist 2, probably the best thing about Poltergeist 2. We'll never forget the original Poltergeist and just how terrifying that movie was. Yeah, you got it. The Poltergeist Preacher. Absolutely. And it was probably one of the first shows that really conveyed that whole concept that, oh my goodness, a banker is behind all this. And the whole reason he's trying to suppress this investigation and he can just make calls and he has all this power and Crockett can't touch him is because he's a banker. Yeah. And that's the whole concept behind it. Whatever your thoughts are on Julian Beck, he was a really good actor. So anyway, we'll close off with good old Mr. Beck and go on to the next portion here. So let me get it up. So we'll go from all these elements of pop culture, and I'm going to apologize because there are a lot of things that I'm overlooking here because, like I said, we could talk about the pop culture of the 80s for 48 hours on this live stream and not ever get tired of it. So, all right, let's go on to our next set of images. And now we're going to talk about the enduring nostalgia. And here's where I'm really going to open it up to you because I want to hear your thoughts or read your thoughts on this enduring nostalgia of the 1980s. Now, what are we looking at here? Let me zoom in just in case you don't remember. Does anybody know what movie this is from and what year this is from? Oh yeah, very true. Yeah, that really came down too. Oh, somebody's on it. Yep. My favorite, the remade Clash of the Titans, 2010. And for whatever reason, I bring this up because, in the 2000s, we had some remakes. You had Dukes of Hazzard. You started to see all this reference to the 80s and the 2000s. But for whatever reason, by 2010, it just really seemed to take off. This strange nostalgia. And this is really how you can quantify the staying power of the nostalgia for the 1980s. All the movies, all the money, all the effort they've sunk into remaking all this stuff, reimagining it. And you all know how I feel about Clash of the Titans. And I'm not here to dog these movies. I'm not here to drag them down or anything like that, or subjectively or objectively evaluate them. I'm not a film reviewer. I'll talk about old world connections. But I think what really bothered me about this movie was they went out of their way to degrade the original one to try to make this movie seem a little bit better. And the original one was a creative movie. It really felt like they actually had the gods in it. So we started seeing all these remakes. Oh yeah, Shogun. Okay, I'm just not going to say anything. I don't have anything nice to say here. Okay, I mean, Richard Chamberlain from the original one. I really miss Richard Chamberlain, and I'm well aware of who the guy was in his private life, and it's not important. He was a great actor. Why are they bringing this back? I don't know, Yes, brother, I know you're out there and you're probably listening to this and you're saying, hey, I thought you'd be excited about this. No, I'm getting tired of this. We just keep doing this over and over again. We keep remaking all this stuff, and it's all from the 1980s. Yeah, exactly. And this one's coming out next week. And so why do we not have any original content? Why do we not have original films? Well, you could say it's because it's the Hollywood system. They suppress the screenwriters. It's just easier to do what's already been done. It's more financially viable, blah, 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 blah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, less said about that. And of course, we're redoing the Ghostbusters too, because, we couldn't leave that alone. I mean, you can find just as many nostalgia examples, Ready Player One. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, nothing against Cosmo Jarvis. I've never even heard of the guy until I looked him up for this movie, but I'm trying to figure out why they didn't get Charlie Hunnam to play John Blackthorne. But, I'm not a casting director. Don't ask me. So, anyway, I mean, I'm sure, they'll do the best job they can adapting it from the novel. Yeah. That would have been my choice to play John Blackthorne. Look at that. You can actually see something behind the eyes. But okay, enough on Jack's Teller there. The Indiana Jones. Oh, yeah. 2000, we got that again with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And as if that wasn't enough, they brought back Dial of Destiny. So I want to open it up to y'all. Oh, I'm glad you brought that up there, Leonard. I'm so happy they haven't done that yet. We haven't gotten a Goonies remake yet, thank goodness. Oh, what do you got there, Jamie? Control of social programming. Yeah. Why do you think, and this is an open question for everybody, why do you think that we keep seeing these movies remade? And believe me, it's every single movie from the 80s, whether it was financially successful or not. Now, of course, Indiana Jones, very financially successful, great series. But yeah, and this is what we're at right now. Now we're just begging not to have our favorite franchises or films redone, because why do they redo them? Oh, good one there, Jerry Jason. Yeah, the 1984 movie with John Hurt. Wonderful performance. John Hurt's a great actor, too. I always liked his Caligula in I, Claudius. Yeah, Back to the Future Part 2. That came out in 1989. It's kind of, I was glad they were able to avoid the sequel pitfall of Back to the Future Part 3, even though it was a 90s movie. Ah, yes. I think you're on it right there. Now, what we have to consider is, was there some sort of predictive programming already going on in the 80s, or was it original? Well, I leave that question to you all, and I think it comes down to a lot of that as well, Kathy. I mean, are we lacking imagination? Is it something that we're missing? Not really sure. Definitely. Okay, I'm just going to address this. Yes, J.J. Abrams has said he's remaking one of my favorite movies, Kroll, and I can't explain why, because Kroll was a box office failure. Look, I can admit it was my favorite movie. What are we going to get? Kit Harington as Colwyn and Patrick Stewart as Yunar? What's it going to be? Margaret Robbie as Lissa, and then they're going to have Sigourney Weaver voice her just like they did in the original with Lisette Anthony. Biggest mistake they made was not letting Lisette Anthony use her own voice in the original movie. So I think it's a great movie, and if you actually go back and watch it, you'll see. But why are they remaking this? This movie was not a financial success. Why? Why bother? Why sink the resources into it? Yeah, this guy's expression really sums up mine about this. Actually, I'll give him credit. He's being more controlled than I am, because this bothers me. I don't know why we keep doing this, but I know why. It's supposed to bother us. And who can forget the Star Wars sequels, right? And what were those? Yes, he was, Sarah. You're absolutely right. Well, it's all good. I had to get away from talking about the Civil War, J-Dubs. You can't do the Civil War all the time. Although I get the feeling I could probably just keep doing Civil War videos for the rest of my life. Yeah, but do you really think it's going to be done right? Do you think that's the point? Has that ever been the point? Yeah. Well, and whatever you think of these movies in a qualitative fashion, and I'm going to say something that's a little controversial here, but I've got a way to know that Rian Johnson is actually a great director. A lot of people like to say he's not. He made Skellig Michael, one of the best old world sites, in my humble opinion, on the southwest side of Ireland, seem like a very depressing place. Only a good director could achieve that. Now, we don't need to say anything else about the writing or anything like that, but the original Star Wars had a lot of great old world concepts in it, as did the original Star Trek. And over time, we've seen that change. Now, I'm not evaluating how good or how bad these shows are, because I know I'm on dangerous ground here right now. So, yeah, the glaive there, Paul McCarty, the glaive. You will need the power of the glaive. Anyways, okay, enough of the Star Wars sequels. Moving on. Yes, I'm just going to hit it head on. The final season of Star Trek Picard, which everybody loves to tell me it was so good. You know what? And it may have been. I haven't watched it. And you're going to ask, well, why haven't you watched it? Aren't you a Star Trek fan? I'm going to tell you why I haven't watched it. I saw the series finale of Star Trek The Next Generation. It was called All Good Things. The Star Trek The Next Generation movies, the exception of First Contact, and even that one, they just didn't resonate. There was something changing in Star Trek at that time. Whether it was the plots or whatever else, they didn't seem to have the magic that the original series did. Now, this is just from my perspective, but I'm trying to figure out why they needed to come back and do this. Why reunite this crew and give them another send-off? Are we going to have to do this again in 30 years in the 2050s? Are we going to do CGI, AI-generated Patrick Stewart, Gates McFadden, Jonathan Frakes, and then replicate all their voices and then bring them all back for another farewell? I mean, why do we not let this go? It's really, really bizarre. And Jamie, I'm not even talking about that right now at this point. We're not even considering that. But why? Why do they keep doing this? And it's so many different things too. Yeah, and that will forever be the Star Trek that they keep trying to go back to. Oh, the Wrath of Khan. Well, sorry, but you're never going to beat an antagonist like Ricardo Montalban. And the thing about the Wrath of Khan people don't talk about is they had Nicholas Meyer. And for whatever reason, Nicholas Meyer's career never exploded. I mean, he had a successful career, but he was never doing all kinds of stuff in Hollywood. A wonderful creative mind and one of those guys who was just suppressed. So it depends on the story there, Batgamer Show. It depends on the story. There's a lot in some of the stories and there's not so much. And oddly enough, you'll see that corroborate with the passage of time. Okay, enough of this. And actually, I moved on from that one. We're actually in the powerful, enduring nostalgia. So again, that's what they're banking on, our nostalgia. I love Star Trek. I just want to see Picard again. I don't care what they're doing to him. I don't care what the quality of the series is. I just want to see him again. I want to see the whole crew get together on the Enterprise D. So what if it got crashed on Veridia 3? It was Veridia 3, right? Yeah, and funny that Nexus was a plot device in Star Trek Generations. This one really torqued me off, and I completely forgot about it. Remember the A-Team remake? Yeah, a lot of people don't remember it either. Liam Neeson in this, and this was just such a forgettable movie for so many reasons, and really at that same time frame when this was all starting. Oh yeah. Yep, the Super Mario Brothers and everything else. Yeah, I mean, I completely forgot about this movie. I remember seeing it, but I don't remember a darn thing from it. Kind of like how I felt when I watched The Force Awakens, and I was thinking, what's so impactful about this? What's so great? Why am I watching this? And then I just stopped watching it and I never really watched it again. But again, that's just me. Make of it what you will. Now, I bring this up. Now, this isn't nostalgia. 2010, another 1984 movie with Roy Scheider and Helen Mirren. It's the sequel to 2001, a high concept science fiction story from Arthur C. Clarke. And of course, if you haven't figured out the secret of science fiction, I'm sure you will eventually. But in any event, I bring this movie up because in 2010, we had all these signs of what the technology was going to be in 2010. We could go to Jupiter, we could invent hypersleep, and here we are in 2024, and we have none of these things. We're bragging about another unmanned landing on the moon. So where's our technological level? Yeah. Does it seem like we're stuck? No. Oh, yeah. Open the pod bay doors, Hal. I'm sorry, Dave. I can't do that. Yeah, a lot of people felt that way by that point. And a lot of people were phoning it in by that point anyway, but the less said about that. But, if you go back and you watch 2010, just keep that in mind. That movie was made in 1984, and it was a movie set in the future of 2010, which is 14 years in the past. And just take a look and see what they were imagining then. And how futuristic does it feel? It's really, really strange when you take it from that perspective. And then, of course, Stranger Things. Yeah, the ultimate ploy to nostalgia. And, that nostalgia that kind of started, if you think about it, Stranger Things was a bit of an evolution of Super 8. Of course, it's set in the 80s. We got our Dungeons and Dragons Club and everything else that we did. Okay, and now something else I'm going to bring up. 80s Synthwave. Yes, the music. We talk about how we like the music from the 80s. And, well, now it's always going to endure. We've got the instruments and we've got new bands that are doing it. Have you ever compared and contrasted, though, the synthwave with an actual original 80s song? And how does it sound to you? Yeah, pretty much. I mean, didn't it just feel like it was the exact same thing? And granted, with a lot of these movies, but here's a little challenge I have for you. Go back and listen to original songs from the 80s, maybe Love in Siberia by Laban. It is a bona fide 1980s song. And then compare and contrast it with listening to Synthwave, anything, or pop synth or whatever. And tell me what you hear in it. Tell me how it sounds. And can you really tell the difference? Oh, yeah. And they bring back all the references and the nostalgia and everything else with it as well. And so anyway, it's just another sign that nostalgia endures. All of our movies, our TV series, our music, it's still the same flippin' thing. It just doesn't go away. Okay. So enough of the nostalgia. Let's just take a look at some technological innovation here from the 1980s. And give me 1 second here, and I'll have this right on up. Share screen. And this will be a little bit of a blast from the past. Okay. I'm sure you all remember this little device. Oh, Thompson Twins. Yeah, that's a good one. The good old-fashioned VCR. Yeah, they had Betamax too at the time, but this is your only option, and this was an invention in the 1980s, and suddenly you could watch movies in your living room. Prior to this, you were not doing that. You could only see them in theaters. Oh, don't worry, Annette. I didn't forget. So I bring up the Space Shuttle Challenger because remember the Challenger exploded in 1986. And for some reason, it was an official explanation for why our technology seemed to stagnate and go backwards. And then you might recall the Columbia went down in the 2003 as well. And so the Space Shuttle program, supposed to be the Great Leap Forward, turned out to be the Great Leap Backwards. We couldn't even match the achievements of the 1960s despite greater technology. I only bring that up, and yes, there was a tragedy associated with the Challenger, and I'm certainly not going to show it exploding because that's what I'm supposed to show you, and I'm not good at doing what I'm supposed to do. But anyway, the Challenger was another keystone 1980s event or watershed moment. Of course, the personal computer, the original Macintosh or Apple II, Apple III, what have you, the Commodore, if you remember that, actually having a computer in your home. That really came about in the 1980s. Well, we all have computers. We're all on one right now. We're on a cell phone of some sort. Oh, yeah. And on that note, the original brick cell phone. There's the 1980s version of Zach Morris using the good old cell phone at that time. So the technology that was innovated or at least introduced in the 80s for whatever reason, it all led to the technology we have now. All they did was they combined the computer, the Walkman, which I haven't shown yet, and put it in a cell phone that you carry with you. And it does everything else that you need. Oh, here's the Challenger crew. Yeah, it's funny. One unfortunate teacher and crew that went down. The next thing you knew, space travel was suddenly stagnated and hasn't gone any further than what it went in the 1960s. And here we are in 2024. But just don't think on that, okay? Just enjoy yourself and remember the history and honor the people who've passed away. And I certainly don't want to dishonor them. I'm just, remembering it. It was a big deal in 1986 when this happened. What was the reality behind it? Well, we can debate that till we're blue in the face. And then, of course, everybody talked about the malfunction and all the issues that we had. Even though 20 years before this, we had a very definitive and successful space program officially. But, and we're given this official explanation that NASA became too bureaucratic in the 1980s and rested on its laurels. I always found this funny here with Michael Douglas with the cell phone. And then, of course, the timeline behind some of the major inventions of the 1980s. The CD, that went away really quick. But all these inventions and all this technology went together. And I certainly don't want to forget the gaming systems that really came about in the 1980s, the computers and everything else that went along with it. Oh, yeah. Yeah, isn't it? And when you see that, does it really remind you of the 80s sooner west, or is it just a reference? That's hard to say. Maybe, maybe not. It's interesting because when you look into that, you might be surprised at how far back the military really is. I guess it just depends which part of the military you're talking about. Oh yeah, good old Contra on the NES. That's still a classic to this day. The old CD player, because the CD player came big in the 80s. We replaced it. MP3 player, MP4 player, what have you. Remember this? Your old library of VHS tapes. My goodness, this took up so much space. I got to admit, though, there's a part of me that does kind of miss VHS tapes. It's almost like we valued movies a little bit more Or was it because we appreciated them more? I don't know. Don't answer that. And then, of course, the good old Walkman. And like I said, all that technology amalgamated on a device that you now carry with you everywhere you go. Oh, yeah, the CD players. Yeah, I miss them too. What am I going to say? Yep, press play on tape. That's true. Yep, the Atari. I mean, it was innovated in the late 70s, but it really had its heyday in the 80s. And of course, the video game crash that also happened in the 80s. That's why you have ET cassettes that are supposedly buried all over the place. So, all this technology, this nostalgia, this powerful pop culture, what's really the point behind all this? Why is this so important and why does this endure to this day? So, what's happening and why? Why can't we let go of the 1980s and what does it have to do with the old world? Is it really a time nexus? Is there something that happened in the 1980s that changed our perceptions? Oh, yeah. Good one there, Celeste. Yep. And I worked in a video store back in the day, and I do remember that. Good to see you, Jacob. Thanks for joining us. Yep, and it all became the iPod, and now it's all on the iPhone. All you need is your iPhone, and that's it. You can do everything on your iPhone. Yeah, they started all those gaming systems, Jamie. That's right. Yeah, Donnie Darko, a 2000s movie where we started our lovely nostalgia binge in the 21st century that continues to this day. It has not changed. All right, so let me go to some theories here. What is really going on? Give me 1 second here. So the last part. So here's your official timeline of the 1980s. And what is really going on with the 1980s? So Rubik's Cube, yeah, they associate that with 1980. The Royal Wedding, we talked about that. The Olympics, hey, remember when the Olympics were a much bigger deal? When they did both the summer and winter Olympics every 4 years, 84, 88. Now they do them every 2 years, and it just seems like the Olympics is always going on. Talked about the Challenger disaster. Here's something a lot of people might not have recognized. The first Martin Luther King Day was actually in 1983. And that was something that really came about in the 1980s. The Wall Street crash in 1987. And then we talked about World AIDS Day. Now it just depends on what timeline you're looking at. Now, you may or may not know that the real advent of the internet, while we remember it starting in the 1990s, it actually came about in the 1980s with protocols in the early 1980s, and then the World Wide Web in 1989. No World Wide Web, no internet. Now, of course, it originally came from ARPANET, but a key event. The internet really came about and evolved into what it is today in the 1980s. Isn't that interesting? Are a lot of people aware of that? Oh, they still have the World's Fairs, Heidi. They're just very, very subtle. They don't showcase the same things that they used to, but you can still see them and look them up. Oh, yes. Yeah, don't worry. We're getting to that. And, here's your evolution of the internet, 83, the domain name system. So critical right there. And then the World Wide Web in 89. So it was really the 1980s. And then the 1990s, we got our actual internet. We got our good friends, Amazon and eBay. And then we got rid of the shopping mall in the early 2010s. So yeah, life's really good. Yeah, I know I'm being a little facetious there, but what are you going to do about it? Okay, since you brought up CERN, European Nuclear Research. Yeah, interesting acronym. CERN actually started one of their greatest experiments in the early 1980s, and they called it the Antiproton Proton Collider, or it's actually the Proton Antiproton Collider. They started doing these experiments in this underground site, Underground Area 2, how aptly named. And apparently these experiments changed a lot of things. Now, is CERN just merely information that's given to us for us to focus on and it doesn't really mean anything, or is there something behind it? I don't know, but it is very fascinating, especially when you see devices like this displayed at CERN. And then you see this entire underground area too with this original anti-proton or proton anti-proton collider. The actual name for it's an even bigger tongue twister. But they were doing all this stuff in the 80s. And of course, we know this has evolved to the current large collider, large hadron collider that they have now. Speak of the devil. And, this is another picture of the apparatus. So we have all these images and all these rumors of stuff going on with it. Who knows what's really going on? Here's the LHC, Large Hadron Collider. And oddly enough, it looks like this interior of this temple in India. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Actually, isn't it funny how the old stonework actually appears more technologically advanced and as though it offers something more? So, what's really going on with this? What are your thoughts on this similarity? Is this just a coincidence? And remember, all this stuff started in the early 1980s. And you can find quite a big difference between events prior to 1983 and after 1983. Now, was that really a nexus point? Is that where we had divergent timelines, divergent realities? Or is it all just a coincidence? I'm not really sure. I don't know. But those are some of the theories that we're looking at. Yeah, I mean, something had to go on there. Maybe. I mean, we don't know. Is it being changed, or is it actually because somebody discovered old world technology and started meddling with it and not knowing what they were doing, they actually caused something? That's a theory that goes through in my mind. That we didn't actually invent anything new. We get these, let's just say, rather cheap looking construction of some of these devices, this great apparatus, this collider. But then you look at this. Which one actually looks more legitimate? Which one looks more solid? Which one looks more technologically advanced? Again, not telling you what to think, but it's very interesting when you look at this and you take these considerations into account. And this is probably the real crux of this whole 1980s time nexus. Now, can I prove anything's going on? No. Oh, yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, quantum paradox. And even the movie, The Philadelphia Experiment, alluded to that there was something crazy going on because of what was being meddled with. There were a lot of movies that reflected that aspect as well. Yeah, exactly, Julia. But in the distant past, we could do the actual carving and really make it, at least in India, they could, if we go along with nations in the actual history that we're given. Hey, thanks, Doc Rod. I appreciate that. Yep. And funny you bring up Hamlet, but yeah, exactly. And it's funny how that this is just a coincidence. Now, is this just something for us to devote our attention to? It could be. Or is there really something going on? Is there a divergence of timelines? Is there a divergence of realities? Hard to say. Yeah, true. But isn't it funny, JK, how many alternative researchers and people who do this thing that we do want to insist that time is real in a way? It's very hard for us to let go of it. Now, I'm not pointing the finger at alternative researchers. I'm pointing the finger at myself. It's very hard for me to let go of time because we're indoctrinated with time. But you're absolutely right. Oh, yeah. Nope, you're absolutely true. So anyway, moving on from that, another keystone event or another watershed event. There's all these crazy terms. I mean, that historians used to use, but Halley's Comet, a big event in 1986. And, it was talked about quite a bit at the time. Yeah, and the perception of it definitely seems to be. And I think there's a lot of proof behind that, holidays, naming months, what's the actual naming convention, so on and so forth. But Halley's Comet, a big event from 1986. There were a couple different movies made about it, although Halley's Comet was actually featured in a movie we'll get to in a second. Here's an image of Halley's Comet. Everybody talked about it. It's only around every 70 odd years. Life Force, a 1985 science fiction film where they came across what they called vampires or space vampires, or call them what you will. Very interesting science fiction movie from the 80s. And some really interesting visuals and images. And this was quite a terrifying movie, although some people consider it sci-fi schlock. Premise behind it being that there were space aliens or vampires that would suck people's energy or life force out of them. And then these people would be transitioned into vampires themselves. And that's the root of the vampire legend. Very interesting. Even more interesting if you consider the fact that it's something else reflecting some distant past or some threat that was faced in the distant past. Yeah, isn't that funny? I forgot about that. Thanks for that, drunk wedding photographer. I forgot about the Deus Ex Machina. You and me both, Doc Ride. Yeah, especially, when you got to get the horses dewormed or anything. That always seems to come up a little fast, doesn't it? Or whenever the farrier's showing up. Oh, yeah, Spaceballs. That's a good one. Yep, no doubt about it. Life Force did have a great soundtrack to it. You're right. And Patrick Stewart was in it as well. I forgot about that. Oh, The Hidden. Yeah, that was another good one. Action sci-fi hybrid film, Jamie. One of the first ones with Kyle MacLachlan, the protagonist from Dune. Very interesting film. I forgot all about that one. Here's one of the space alien vampires. Now, oddly enough, when they go around and they destroy most of the city of London, or at least they convert most of the population into vampires, the life force or energy is projected back to St. Paul's Cathedral, a nice old world building. Yeah, exactly. An old William Shatner. So I can certainly recommend Life Force. Now, am I saying that there were ever energy vampires in the past or some sort of vampires in the past? Who knows? But it is interesting, though, when you consider that this film was released in the 80s and it coincided with Halley's Comet. Again, a lot of coincidences. Oh, yeah. That's a tough one to talk about there, Sean P. Yeah, because they talk about the interstates or the freeways. I can still hear Christopher Lloyd saying, the freeway, in my mind. Yeah, the original Ghostbusters. And remember, nobody wanted to do that sequel, especially Bill Murray. And that was in 89, that summer of the sequel. Now, the final portion of this, The Day of the Dove. This is a third season of the classic Star Trek. Now, a lot of people consider the third season kind of a poor season because that's where they brought in the new producer and they had some odd plots. But The Day of the Dove was very interesting because in this episode, the Enterprise encounters this strange alien life form that simply wants to set up a situation where they come across a group of Klingons and have the crew of the Enterprise fight the Klingons. And if you're not familiar with the original series, the Klingons were the antagonists till they were made into a caricature in The Next Generation and then Deep Space Nine especially. But anyway, you suddenly see the original crew start to break down and go at each other's throats. And Kirk and Scotty and Spock recognize that's not how they usually act, that something seems to be changing them. And what they realize is that this alien life form, at least that's what the episode calls it, but we could really call it anything, some other form of life, it's so it can maintain a constant state of violence, have the two crews fight each other for all time. Now, if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend it because there may be a lot of reality that's being reflected in that particular episode. Now, I know it's classic Star Trek, but there was a lot of high concepts to it and a lot of old world references. And I think there was an old world reference. You have this alien life form that wants the crews to fight each other because it wants the negative emotion. It wants the emotion because it feeds off of it. It feeds off the violence. It feeds off the hatred and it projects it and it gets stronger for the crews of the two ships as the episode goes along. Well, eventually Kirk figures it out with Kang, the Klingon commander, portrayed by wonderful actor Michael Ansara. Voice alone was incredible. And they figure out that their best bet to defeat this alien life form and this life form is just to laugh at it. Yes. And aren't there so many people out there who don't like people who laugh and smile? Notice I say that with a laugh. So, anyways. But really what that comes down to is what's really going on from the 1980s. Is it a time nexus? Did we have some strange break in reality? Is there some other power that's actually influencing our realm? Or is there some other explanation behind it? Yes, Kang. I am Kang. Yeah, exactly. Aha. And that's actually one of the main theories behind it, Julia. And it's all in this little 50-minute episode of classic Star Trek, all depicted in the entire episode. How it works, how to get past it, it's all there. You'd almost think that the writers of the original Star Trek had some old world influences on them, just like the writer of the original Star Wars, especially Empire Strikes Back. Ah, yes, absolutely. And so I think that's one of the big warnings that we can take from all this. And whatever the reality behind all this is, I mean, I often say that the mainstream account of things being true gets less likely with every exploration, and I stand by that. I certainly want to remind you all that everything that happened in the 1980s is still being referred to this day. So, in any event, what were your thoughts on this particular exploration? I know it's a little different than the explorations that we've done in the past. But how did you feel about this exploration? Would you like to look at more time nexuses, or would you prefer to go back to things that are a little bit more conventional, going back to buildings, exploring other things, other historical events? Oh, an original Star Wars exploration. Yeah, that could go on for quite a while. Maybe I could program that into Old World in the movies. So, yeah, that's true. Okay. Well, I just got to ask. There's always demand, and then I know there's always conflicting schedules. There's other things going on. So, now, the 1920s. Yes, you're right. Quantum paradox, Art Deco, and everything else. Although the question that comes down to that, and I'm still trying to answer this question, is when did that amorphous time period end? So that's a good one. What's our real story? Yeah, I know you're a Star Trek fan. I haven't forgotten. Well, and you know what? I'm glad you say that, Mel, because I needed a little break myself. I'm kind of glad that this was the one that won out. I mean, I would have done whatever you asked, but it's always good to look at different things from different perspectives. Is it going to appeal to everybody? No, but you can't appeal to everybody all the time. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was another 80s mainstay there, wasn't it? The Harlem Globetrotters. Oh, yeah. Deviant art. Oh, yeah, it certainly did. It certainly did. Okay, so just to give you a warning before we close out tonight, and yes, I say warning very directly, explorations this week are going to take a little bit of a different tone. I hope you'll enjoy them. We're still going to be looking at the same things. I'm not going to completely drop my format. And yeah, I'm going to look to get into World War I, World War II here in due time. So there's a lot to look at in both those conflicts and the time frame before them and after them. No doubt about it. Yeah. Is it 2020 or is it the whole 21st century? That's a good question there in and of itself. Ooh, that's a tough one. Well, thanks, Sooner West. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think we all love the 80s because we're supposed to. We remember it all fondly. A lot of us remember it as an original time frame, a genuine time frame. Is that true? I don't know. So, but yeah, we'll definitely continue on with the explorations and look to get something good next week that appeals to all of you. So, oh goodness, yeah, I'll have to keep my head low. Celeste, you'll have to table that one. Ask me that one separately. I can tell you what I really think of the Dark Ages. I think I've answered it in one of the Reset playlists. So, yeah, Russia's an interesting place. Really, everywhere in the land is interesting places, though. So, very much so. I covered it in the stadium explorations there, Tom. Oh, well, thanks, Doc Rod. Yeah. True. All right. So anyway, look out. We'll have a full schedule of explorations coming up this week. I really appreciate you joining me. Thank you for all the support and thank you for being here. And like I said, it's everything that you contribute that really makes this research worthwhile. So, oh yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Care Bears. There were some dark episodes of that series. So, yeah, maybe. And actually, I have a special members video. It's going to come out. It's going to be for Prime Explorers, and I'm going to talk about the celestial bodies and what's appearing in the sky and what it may mean. And I've promised that for a while. So, all right. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the exploration. Oh, all in good time. All in good time. Although that's a bit of a minefield. One has to be careful when they navigate that one. So. Yep, we'll see. We'll see what happens. So, but anyway, I appreciate you all being here, and I hope you have a good weekend wherever you are in the land, and you enjoy the rest of your week. And we'll see you on the next exploration. And as always, explore yourself, ask questions, and you restore the world. Thank you so much for joining me.